The wind slipped through the Godswood like a whispered accusation, cold fingers threading the dark branches and setting the red leaves fluttering down around Jon Snow. He stood before the ancient weirwood, watching the carved face bleed sap like frozen tears, and tried to pretend the stillness in his chest was peace and not a hollow waiting for something he could not yet name. Snow moved in a slow drift around his boots. The world beyond the trees softened into hush and shadow. On the far walls of Winterfell, torches burned in lonely pairs, small defiant flames pressed against an endless night. The war had ended, the dead pushed back into their graves and the Night King shattered like brittle ice. Yet the quiet that followed had never felt like victory to him. Felt like the pause between blows. Ghost padded through the snow, a pale shadow slipping out from behind a low branch, his red eyes catching the faint light. The dire wolf brushed against Jon's side, thick fur cold and reassuring beneath Jon's gloved hand. Jon curled his fingers into that fur and scratched the scar along Ghost's neck, listening to the soft rattle of the leaves. Still awake, the voice came from behind him. Jon didn't start. He had heard the gate to the gods would creak a few moments before, the step on the frosted stones too light to be a guard, too certain to be a servant. He turned slowly to see Sansa Stark framed by the arch of branches, her cloak the gray of a gathering storm, fox fur collar dusted with snow. The torch in her hand painted her hair a deep copper, like embers banked for the night. "I thought you'd gone to bed," Jon said. Sansa moved closer, her eyes briefly tracing the outline of the weirwood's face, then dropping to Jon's hand resting on Ghost's neck. "I might have," she said, "if you hadn't left the hall like a man being chased." He gave a short, humorless huff of breath. "No one's chasing me. That's what you think." Sansa stood beside him, close enough that he could feel the faint warmth radiating from her, though the Godswood devoured most of it. They watched the sky in silence for a while. The moon hung low and thin, silver smoke behind passing clouds. Somewhere in the distance, a raven cawed, the sound harsh and oddly muffled. "You've been different," Sansa said at last, "since Bran came home. Since the letters from the Citadel started arriving. You're quieter, even for you." "Bran's different," Jon said. "That much was easy. He sees things. He sees everything." There was a shiver in her tone that had nothing to do with the cold. "And he's watching you." Jon looked back at the weirwood. The eyes carved into the trunk were deep and dark, the dried sap beneath them like rusted blood. Sometimes, when Bran sat his chair beneath those branches, his own eyes gone white as snow, Jon felt the weight of that gaze like a hand pressed to the back of his neck. "He says there are truths I need to hear," Jon murmured. "Truths about the past. About me." Sansa's breath caught. He heard it as clearly as if she had cried out. "What kind of truths?" Jon shook his head. "He hasn't said. Not yet. Just that the Maester sent word. Old books. Old records. He wanted me to wait until they arrived." "So you're hiding from letters now?" Sansa said, trying for lightness and not quite finding it. Her gloved fingers tightened around the torch. "That doesn't sound like the man who rode a dragon into the heart of the dead." Jon shrugged. "Dragons I understand. Letters." He let the rest trail away. The raven called again, closer this time. Jon glanced up. A black shape shifted among the higher branches, snow shaking loose. For an instant the bird's head turned and he thought, just for a heartbeat, that he heard something like words instead of a caw, a sibilant hiss broken by the wind. He frowned. "What is it?" Sansa asked. "Nothing." He stroked Ghost's fur again. "I just thought." He didn't say that he had dreamed of ravens in recent nights, flocks of them swirling around towers and flames, their voices merging into a rough, lilting tongue he had never learned yet somehow understood. He didn't say that in those dreams the birds called him by a name that was not his own. Sansa watched him as if she could read thoughts in the set of his shoulders. "You bear too much alone," she said quietly. "You always have. Whatever Bran's found, whatever those maesters have written in their dusty little books, you don't have to face it without us." Jon turned to her, Snow clung to her lashes and darkened the wool of her cloak. There was a queen's composure in the line of her spine, but the girl he'd left behind all those years ago flickered in her eyes, worried for him as she had been for a bastard brother in a smoky hall. "I'm not a boy anymore," he said. "I know that." Her gaze hardened. "But you're still my family. You're still Jon Snow." He opened his mouth, then closed it again. The raven in the branches rustled, shaking loose another dusting of white. "Maybe not for long," he said. Sansa stiffened. "What does that mean?" "It means," Jon murmured, "that I don't know who I am. Not truly. And Bran means to tell me." The words hung between them like frost. Sansa's fingers loosened around the torch, the flame guttering briefly in the wind before steadying again. "Then let him," she said. "Hiding in the Godswood won't change whatever he's seen." Ghost's ears pricked. The direwolf gave a low, uneasy whine, as if something unseen had brushed past them. Jon looked back to the weirwood. For one dizzy heartbeat, he thought the carved mouth had curved, just slightly, as if the tree were about to speak. He swallowed, tasting iron and snow. "I'll see him in the morning," Jon said. Sansa nodded, though the worry in her eyes deepened. "In the morning, then." When she turned to go, the raven in the branches let out another cry. This time the sound was sharper, cracked, and there was a shape inside it. Trio of syllables that made Jon's skin prickle. Valyria. The word, if it was a word at all, dissolved into the wind. Jon stared up, but the raven was only a dark silhouette among the branches, feathers ruffled against the cold. He told himself he had imagined it. He did not quite believe himself. Far to the south, where snow came only as a rumor and the sea smelled of salt instead of ice, Samwell Tarly's candle sputtered, guttered, and reclaimed its small dominion over the dark. The great library of the Citadel rose around him in shadowy tiers, shelves marching away into dimness like ranks of patient soldiers. Chains rattled softly overhead with every draft. The glass candles, those strange relics from the east, sat cold and dark in their iron cradles, as they had for 100 years and more. Only Sam's modest flame burned on, licking at the heavy air. He rubbed at his eyes and looked again at the scroll unrolled before him. The ink was faded to a sickly brown, the strokes cramped and elegant, Valyrian script curling like smoke across the parchment. His own handwriting crowded the margins. A mess of crowded translations in the common tongue, notes crammed at every angle as if he could pin the meaning down more firmly by surrounding it. "On the union of blood and flame in times of great shadow," he muttered, tracing the title with a fingertip. "By gods, I still can't say his name. Some archon of Valyria with too many consonants." He flipped to the next scroll in the stack, then back again. A chill ran down his spine, entirely separate from the drafts that prowled between the shelves. It had started when he first found the reference, buried in an index of indices, a footnote in a commentary on a book no one had read in 300 years, and it had not left him since. There were patterns here, threads that tugged all the way from the Doom to the Long Night, from Valyria's dragons to the White Walkers in the far north. And woven somewhere in that web, bright enough to sear the eyes once noticed, was Jon Snow. A cough sounded behind him, polite and disapproving. Sam jumped, nearly knocking his candle over. He grabbed it with a flailing hand, steadying the flame, then turned on his stool. Archmaester Ambrose stood in the pool of light, gray robes hanging from a spare frame, his chain glinting dull in the candle glow. His expression was the same mild disapproval he reserved for most things that weren't salves or surgeries. "You are still awake," Ambrose observed. "Yes, Archmaester," Sam said, swallowing. I thought I'd finished this section. There's something here about..." He trailed off. The Citadel did not look kindly on something here. It preferred citations and centuries, references that could be cross-checked and arguments that had cooled to safe ash. "About the north," Ambrose supplied, his tone neutral. Sam licked his lips. "Yes, about the north. About the long night. About prophecy. Valyrian prophecy. One of Ebro's eyebrows climbed. "A slow, skeptical arch. We have spoken about this," he said. "Prophecies are like dreams, Tarly. You can always find a way to make them match what you already believe, and never a way to prove that they were ever true." "Yes, Archmaester. Only..." Sam glanced down at the scroll. "Only this one is quite specific. It speaks of a scion of dragon and wolf, born in secret ice, whose fire shall bind the scattered lords of flame. And it's cross-referenced with accounts of the doom I have never seen in any other record. Volcanic surges, strange storms, nightmares reported in cities across the narrow sea. Superstition," Ebro said. "People dream strange things when the ground shakes beneath them. But what if it's not?" The words tumbled out before Sam could stop them. "What if there's a connection between the doom and the long night? Between Valyria's fall and the White Walker's rise? What if they're not separate at all, but echoes? And what if there really is a person who..." He cut himself off with a gulp. Ebro's regarded him for a long time. The candle crackled between them. "You were a steward at the wall," the Archmaester said. "You served the last Lord Commander of the Night's Watch, who abandoned his vows to crown himself king in the north. You have affections, Tarly, allegiances." Sam flinched, but did not look away. "Affections don't change what's written on the page." "No," Ebro said, "but they change how you read it." He stepped closer, looking down at the scroll with its curling Valyrian script and Sam's frantic annotations. His lined fingers hovered over one passage, the ink there darker than elsewhere, as if written with more pressure. "A scion of dragon and wolf," he read. The maesters who first translated this chose a different word. "Lion instead of wolf. It is easy to see what you wish to see." Sam swallowed again. "With respect, Archmaester, the original word is Duravulgan. It's rare, but every other instance refers to wolves, and the marginalia here mentions the northern kings with their beastly banners. This isn't about the Lannisters. It never was." Ebro's eyes flicked to him, searching. Sam forced himself to hold that gaze, though his heart pounded. He thought of Jon on the battlements of the wall, silhouetted against the endless snow, of Jon's hand on Longclaw's hilt, of the way the men of the Night's Watch had gathered around him, despite oaths and prejudices and centuries. "I'm not asking you to believe in prophecy," Sam said quietly. "I'm asking you to believe in words, in records, in the way history repeats itself, even when we don't want it to." Ebro's mouth thinned. He exhaled through his nose, a sound like a tired bellows. "And what would you do with such a belief if you had it?" Sam hesitated. His eyes flicked to the other scroll on the table, the one he had tucked partly beneath the Valyrian text. Not about prophecies at all, that one, but about marriages, annulments, secret unions blessed by wandering septons and recorded only in the most obscure of ledgers. "I'd send word north," Sam said, "to the man who may be that scion. And tell him what?" Ebro's voice was sharper now. "That he is the hero of some dead Valyrian's fever dream? That he's destined to bind scattered lore? DS of flame? Lords who have been ash and rumor for centuries? You will drive him mad with expectation or fear. Or I will give him truth," Sam said, surprising himself with the firmness in his tone. "He's faced the dead. He's faced dragons. He deserves at least that." They stared at one another. Somewhere in the depths of the library, a bell tolled, counting out the indifferent hours. At last, Ebro sighed. The sound seemed to carry all the weight of the Citadel stone, the years of habit and caution pressed into its walls. "You were not made to be a maester," he said. "You were made to be something else." Sam flushed. "I don't know what I was made to be." "Few men do," Ebro said, "but they find out, often in ways they would not have chosen." He looked again at the scroll, then stepped back. "Send your letter, Tarly. If the ravens can still fly that far in this blasted winter, it will reach him. But mark my words, you are not sending him certainty. You are sending him a storm." Sam bowed his head. "Yes, Archmaester." When Ebro's had gone, his footsteps fading into the maze of shelves. Sam sat for a long moment, listening to the quiet. Then he pulled parchment and quill toward him and began to write. He wrote Jon Snow's name with careful strokes, the ink sinking into the fibers like something permanent. As he wrote, another phrase from the Valyrian scroll echoed in his mind, stubborn and insistent. The last son of the Dragon Prince, born in winter's crown, who shall call home those who still remember riding the sky. Sam dipped his quill again, heart beating faster. 7 hells, Jon, he murmured. What are you? Bran Stark felt the world as a web of threads, each touch sending ripples through places and times that were not his own. The bark of the weirwood was rough and cold beneath his fingers. He rested his hand there, palm spread against the bleeding face, and let his breath slip away in slow, measured exhales. Snow fell lightly through the branches, catching in his hair, melting on his cheeks. Somewhere beyond the Godswood, hammers rang on distant anvils, the rhythm of Winterfell's rebuilding. The sounds were muted here, softened by leaf and snow and old magic. Arya Stark lingered near the edge of the trees, half-shadowed, watching him with that wary stillness she carried now. She no longer pretended not to be unnerved when his eyes went white. She had seen too much to pretend anything. Ready? She asked. Bran let the question pass through him. I've been ready for a long time, he said. His voice sounded younger than he felt. He took one more breath, sank his fingers deeper into the grooves of the face, and let himself fall. The Godswood dissolved. The present dissolved. The world stretched and thinned like glass heated to the point of melting, and through its softening surface he could see other moments, other faces, other skies. He saw the Tower of Joy again, as he had so many times that the sight should have dulled and never did. Dawnlight spilling over the red stones, the wind whipping white banners into frayed whispers, the scent of blood and crushed flowers in the air. He saw Eddard Stark's younger face, gaunt with grief and determination, saw Ser Arthur Dayne fall in a blaze of steel and honor, saw Howland Reed lunge with his knife at the last possible instant. He pushed past them into the tower. Lyanna Stark lay on her bed of blood, dark hair glued to her forehead, eyes too bright in a face gone pale with pain. The smell of iron was sharp and thick. She clutched the bundled shape in her arms as if the slightest slackening of her grip would send it tumbling into some abyss. Promise me, she whispered, as she always whispered, every time Bran replayed this moment through sap and stone. Promise me, Ned. But Bran no longer lingered on the words. He knew them by heart. Knew the tears in Eddard Stark's eyes as he bent his head, knew the trembling in his sister's fingers as she pressed the child into his arms. He pushed deeper, focusing not on the vow but on the bundle cradled against Lyanna's breast, on the child. He let his sight sharpen, narrow, until the room fell away. There, swaddled in linen already stained with his mother's blood, was a newborn with dark hair plastered to his skull and eyes squeezed shut. The tiny chest rose and fell in shallow, desperate breaths. The babe's skin shimmered at the edges of Bran's vision, not with light but with potential. The weirwood's consciousness, vast and dispassionate, recognized something in that fragile, squalling life. Threads of red and white and black knotted around him, colors of Stark and Targaryen, of ice and fire. The babe lay at the center of a pattern that stretched both backward and forward, to places and people Bran had never known and yet knew intimately. He tore his gaze away and followed one of those threads backward, racing along its bright length. For a heartbeat, he was in a great hall lit by torches and dragonfire, tapestries bearing 3-headed dragons lining the walls. Rhaegar Targaryen stood there, lean and thoughtful, a silver harp in his hands. His violet eyes were full of a sadness that felt too old for his face. For another heartbeat, Bran stood in a septon dorn, watching Rhaegar take Lyanna's hand before a tired septon and speak words of binding. A harp leaned against the altar, unplayed. Rhaegar's armor was set aside, his hands bare and gentle. Then farther back, a city of towers carved in impossible shapes, bridges arching between them like the skeletons of vast beasts. Valyria. He could smell the sulfurous breath of its volcanoes, hear the distant roars of dragons wheeling in the sky. A group of men and women in dark robes stood on a balcony overlooking the smoking horizon, their faces turned toward the same distant point. They spoke in High Valyrian, voices overlapping in a low, fervent chant. Bran slipped closer, the weirwood's awareness stretching to catch their words. Fire begets fire, one intoned. But where flame burns unchecked, shadow grows. The blood of the dragon alone cannot hold the darkness. The old blood must remember the first, another said. The wolf of the true north, who knew not fire but winter. Their blood once mingled, a third voice whispered. Long ago, before we wrote our histories, it must mingle again, when the sky turns to ash. They raised their hands as one toward a vision only they could see. For a heartbeat, superimposed over Valyria's smoking mountains, Bran saw the wall, unbroken still, gleaming with hoarfrost, stretching across the world like a scar. At its foot, a boy with snow in his hair and a wooden sword in his hand stared up at the ice with gray eyes. The boy looked so much like Jon Snow that Bran's borrowed breath caught. The vision shimmered, fractured. He tried to hold it together, but Valyria's heat was already collapsing into something else. Fire turned to ash, ash to snow. He was pulled forward along the threads he had just followed back, hurtled past the Tower of Joy again, past the God's Eye, past Winterfell's walls rising and falling and rising again. He saw dragons lift from a black island cloaked in mist. He saw Golden Company banners burning on a southern field. He saw a man with Jon Snow's face and different eyes stand between a dragon and a crowd of people, hands raised not in command but in supplication. The dragon's eyes were not the dragons he knew. Deeper, older, as if they remembered a sky over Valyria and 1,000 other riders. Bran tried to hold that image too, but time bucked beneath him. The ravens that circled Godswood cawed, their voices overlapping until they became one voice, one word, repeated again and again until it lost its meaning. Valyria, Valyria, Valyria. Bran let go. He snapped back into his body with a jerk. The world rushed in. A gust of cold, the ache in his legs that he no longer truly felt but remembered, the sound of Arya's quick step on the snow. She was at his side in an instant, hand on the back of his chair, eyes searching his face. What did you see? Bran blinked, his pupils slow to return. The Godswood swam into focus. The weirwood, the snow, the faint shape of the castle beyond. Ravens lined the higher branches, their black forms like strange fruit. All of them were looking at him. Everything, he said softly. And not enough. Arya's mouth tightened. Is it about him? He didn't need to ask who she meant. Yes, Bran said. About Jon Snow. About who he is, and who he will have to be. Arya's grip on the chair whitened her knuckles. You told Sansa, that he's not our father's son. Not completely. He is, Bran said. More than anyone. Ned Stark chose a harder promise than most men could bear. But Jon's blood. Bran looked down at his hand on the weirwood, the pale skin veined faintly with blue. His blood belongs to two houses, to two histories, and the old ones remember both. Arya's eyes flicked to the ravens. They shifted, restless, as if they understood that they were part of this knowing. Then tell him, she said, before the wrong people do. Bran nodded once. The wind stirred. A single red leaf broke free and drifted down to land in his lap like a drop of dried blood. I will, he said. But there is more. There are others. Others. Arya frowned. You mean the dead? They're gone. We burned them. Not those others, Bran said. Others like Jon. Others with dragon blood. Scattered. Hiding. Waiting. He looked up at the ravens again. Their eyes glinted like chips of obsidian. They will feel him when he knows what he is, Bran murmured. They will hear it, like a song carried on the wind. And then the dragonlords who thought themselves dead will remember that they can still fly. By morning, Winterfell's great hall was heavy with the smell of smoke and boiled oats. Men and women shuffled in from the courtyards, shaking snow from their cloaks, stamping the cold out of their boots. Servants moved between the trestle tables with trenchers and pitchers, their cheeks pink from the kitchen's heat. Above it all, the banners of House Stark hung unmoving in the draftless air, gray direwolves on white field watching with cloth eyes. Jon Snow tasted none of the food in front of him. The spoon in his hand might as well have been a sword for all the comfort it gave him. He sat at the high table, muscles tight, aware of every eye that flicked toward him and away. Bran's chair had been drawn up beside the carved stone seat once occupied by Ned Stark. The boy, no, the young man he had become, rested his hands on the arms, his gaze fixed on a point somewhere beyond the far wall. Sansa sat on Jon's other side, her face composed and distant, every line of her body a careful performance of calm. Arya perched a little farther down, half turned to the hall, watchful as a cat. Davos Seaworth leaned against one of the pillars near the high table, a plate balanced on his good hand, the fingers of the other rubbing unconsciously at the place where his missing fingertips met scar tissue. His eyes kept drifting to Jon, then to Bran, then back again. The murmur in the hall ebbed and flowed with each glance. They were king in the north and lady of Winterfell and the strange boy sage who knew too much. They were symbols now, whether they wanted it or not. When the last of the bread had been torn and the porridge scraped from bowls, Sansa rose. The room quieted. That, at least, Jon could be grateful for. The north had always been quick to silence and slow to speech. "There is news," Sansa said, her voice carrying easily. "From the south. From the Citadel." A ripple ran through the hall. The Citadel was far and strange, a place of chains and ravens and men who smelled of parchment. Ravens brought taxes and demands from kings. They did not usually bring news that needed the whole hall. "News for us," Sansa continued. "For our house. For our family." Her eyes slid to Jon. He saw a flicker there. Hesitation, fear, regret, before she masked it again. His stomach clenched. "Lord Davos," Sansa said, "if you would." Davos set his plate aside and stepped forward, a folded scrap of parchment in his hand. The seal had been broken, the wax chipped and smeared. Even from where Jon sat, he could see the faint impression of the Citadel's ring and raven mark. "It's not my place to say these words before your people, my lady," Davos murmured. Sansa's jaw tightened. "It is not mine either," she said, "but they must be said, and someone with no claim but truth should speak them." Bran's head turned, just slightly. His gaze found Jon's, pinning him in place. "It's all right, Davos," Jon said, though nothing felt all right. "Just say it plain." Davos nodded and lifted the parchment. His reading voice was rough but steady, accustomed now to formal words he would once have left to higher men. "From Samwell Tarly of House Tarly, currently sworn to the Night's Watch and in service to the Citadel," he read. "To Jon Snow, called King in the North, Lord of Winterfell and..." Davos paused. "And other titles." The hall listened. Jon's ears rang. Ghost, who lay at his feet, let out a soft huff, as if sensing a hunter beyond the door. "I have found records," Davos continued, "hidden among the accounts and ledgers concerning the late Prince Rhaegar Targaryen. Records that speak of an annulment of his marriage to Elia of House Martell, blessed by the High Septon in secret, and of a second marriage performed in Dorne before a wandering Septon. The bride named in these records is Lyanna of House Stark." A murmur swept through the hall, sharp as the rasp of drawn steel. Jon's spoon slipped from his hand and clattered against the trencher. Sansa's shoulders stiffened. Arya's eyes narrowed to slits. The child born of that union, Davos read, would be no bastard, but the true-born son of Rhaegar Targaryen and Lyanna Stark. The law, as recorded in the Citadel's own texts, would name him first in the line of succession, above any other of Rhaegar's issue, above the children of the Mad King's eldest surviving son. His voice faltered. He looked up at Jon, his eyes full of apology. "Sam writes more," Davos said quietly, dropping the formal cadence. He writes about prophecy, about Valyria, about things I'm not learned enough to understand, if I'm honest. But there's one line he underlined, and he asked that I speak it as written. He cleared his throat. If this is true, then Jon Snow is not Jon Snow at all. He is Aegon of House Targaryen, son of Rhaegar and Lyanna, heir to the Iron Throne by the laws of men, and the prophesied child of ice and fire by the laws of gods and dragonlords. The hall went dead silent. Jon's world narrowed to the space inside his skull. The roar in his ears rose, drowning out even the crackle of the hearth fires. He could see Sansa's profile, pale and still. He could see Arya's hand on the table, fingers tapping once, twice, before going still as well. He could feel Bran's gaze like a weight on his skin. "That's a lie," someone said from the benches below. A lord whose name Jon couldn't place at that moment, Karstark or Manderly or Glover, it hardly mattered. A southern trick. The Targaryen girl sends it, I'd wager, to make us bend the knee. "No," Bran said. It was only one word, softly spoken, but it cut through the buzzing in Jon's head like a blade. All eyes turned. Bran sat a little straighter in his chair, his hands still resting lightly on the arms. "It's not a lie," he said. "I saw it." Sansa's breath hitched. "Bran, in the past," Bran went on, his eyes on Jon, "at the Tower of Joy, I saw our father, your Uncle Ned, cut his way through Rhaegar's guards. I saw him find Anna dying in her bed. I heard their words. She put a child in his arms. Her child. Rhaegar's child. She begged him to keep that child safe. To hide him where Robert Baratheon would never find him." He paused. The hall held its breath. "She named the child Aegon," Bran said, "but our father called him Jon." Jon stood up. He did not remember deciding to. One moment he was sitting on the carved, uncomfortable chair, heart pounding against his ribs like a trapped bird. The next he was on his feet, the bench scraping back behind his knees, the entire hall looming and swaying around him. "That's enough," he said, though his voice came out raw. "You're mistaken." Bran's expression did not change. "I don't mistake the past." "You can't know everything," Jon snapped, the anger a relief after the numbness. "You see bits and pieces. You said so. You see too much and not enough. So maybe this is one of those." "Jon." Sansa's hand touched his arm. He flinched away from it as if burned. Her fingers closed on air. "I'm Ned Stark's son," Jon said. He was aware of the eyes on him now, dozens upon dozens of them, but he could not bring himself to care. "He raised me. He gave me his name." He gave you his name," Bran said quietly. "Not his blood." A muscle jumped in Jon's jaw. Ghost rose, pressing against his leg, teeth bared in a silent snarl at a threat he could not see. "I don't want this," Jon said, the words torn from him. "Do you hear me? I don't want whatever this is. I don't want some southern throne. I don't want prophecies or dragon blood or dragonlords. I want..." He looked down the hall, at the Stark banners, at the men who had followed him into the snow and fire, at the walls that had sheltered more of his childhood than any other roof. "I want to be who I've always been," he finished. "Jon Snow of Winterfell. The rest of it can go to hell." He left the high table then, the hall parting before him like brush before a storm. No one tried to stop him. Even Sansa, even Arya, even Davos held their tongues. Only Bran's voice followed him, soft and inexorable. "You can't be less than what you are, Jon," he said. "You can only refuse to see it." The heavy doors of the hall slammed behind Jon like the closing of a gate. The air in the crypts of Winterfell was colder than the Godswood, colder even than the wind off the wall. It was a deep, old cold that seemed to come not from the walls or the floor but from the stone figures themselves, from the centuries of Starks who had sat their thrones and then set them aside for death. Jon Snow's torch spat and crackled as he descended, the light catching on the iron swords resting in the statue's stony hands. The faces looked down at him, each one bearing some echo of the same long, solemn features. Kings, lords, boys grown into men too quickly, Men who had stood their ground against winter and wildling and worse. He wondered, as he always did, whether he had ever truly belonged among them. Ghost's claws clicked softly on the stone at his side. The direwolf's breath plumed in the chill, a phantom among phantoms. He didn't like it here. His ears were laid back, his body tense, as if he expected the stone wolves at the statue's feet to shake themselves and leap down from their plinths. "Easy," Jon murmured, reaching down to brush his fingers between Ghost's ears. The wolf relaxed fractionally, leaning into the touch. They wound their way deeper, past lords whose names Jon had learned at Old Nan's knee, past the statue of Rickard Stark with his stern jaw and frostbitten eyes, past Brandon Stark's restless features, past Ned Stark, whose stone face was a poor copy of the man Jon remembered, but whose presence still pressed on him like the weight of a hand on his shoulder. Jon did not stop there. He could not tonight. He found her at the far end of the row, where the newest statue stood. Lyanna Stark rode frozen forever upon her stone horse, hair streaming behind her, face curiously peaceful. A crown of winter roses, long since turned to dust, had once circled her brow. Someone, Sansa, most likely, had placed fresh winter roses at the base of the statue some weeks before. Their petals were brown and curling now, but the scent of them lingered faintly under the smell of dust and old stone. Jon raised the torch. The light washed over Lyanna's features, highlighting the line of her jaw, the curve of her nose. He had never known her in life. He had only the stories. A wild girl who could ride as well as any man, who had wept for Rhaegar's song at Harrenhal, who had vanished and been returned as a corpse and a scandal. And now, if Bran and Sam were to be believed as his mother, the word tasted strange on his tongue. He did not speak it aloud. "I don't know why you did it," Jon said to the stone. His voice echoed, small and thin in the vaulted space. "Why you left, why you loved him, why you asked your brother to hide me. I don't understand any of it." Ghost settled at his feet, eyes on the darkness between the statues. "I spent my whole life thinking I was less than everyone else in this family," Jon went on. The words came slowly, but once they began they did not stop. "A mistake, a reminder of some shame my father never spoke of. I told myself it didn't matter, that I could still be a Stark in all the ways that counted." He swallowed. The torchlight wavered. "And now they tell me I'm more," he said. "Not just a lord's bastard, but a prince's son. Not just a Stark, but a Targaryen. He forced the word out. "A dragon, heir to a throne I don't want, bound up in prophecies I never asked for." He stepped closer, until he could reach out and touch the edge of her stone cloak. The stone was slick with cold. "Do you know what they'll say if this is true?" he whispered. "The North, the men who followed me, the ones who died for me, they'll say I lied, that I hid this from them, that I gave them another dragonlord in wolf's clothing." His laugh was short and bitter. "They'll be right." The silence pressed in. Somewhere higher up, water dripped with slow regularity, a steady, patient beat. The dead did not answer. "My father, Ned, he must have known they'd say the same thing," Jon said. "He must have known Robert would kill me if he ever learned, that the North might turn from him for sheltering a Targaryen. And he did it anyway. He bore the weight of that lie his whole life." He closed his eyes for a moment. In the darkness behind his lids, he saw Ned Stark's face the way he remembered it. Not stone and cold, but lined and weary and kind. He saw the way his father's eyes had softened when Jon had asked his mother's name, the way his mouth had tightened before he turned away. "Was I worth that?" Jon asked the woman who had given him half his blood. Was any of this worth it? A faint draft stirred the torch. The shadows on Lyanna's face shifted, the lines of stone softening, hardening, softening again. For an instant, absurdly, Jon imagined she might step down from her horse, wrap her stone arms around him, and whisper the answers into his hair. Nothing moved. Jon let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. Came out as a cloud of white. "I won't be their king," he said. Not the Souths, not the dragonlords, if there are any left besides the queen. He thought briefly of Daenerys Targaryen, of silver hair whipping in the wind, of dragon's wings blotting out the sun, of the fierce, lonely hunger in her eyes. I swore to the North. I swore to our people. That has to mean something. His voice dropped further. But I can't pretend this isn't true. Not if it is. I won't be another man who lives and dies by a lie. He straightened, feeling the ache in his back and shoulders. The weight on his chest hadn't lessened. If anything, it had settled more firmly into place. Father always said the man who passes the sentence should swing the sword, Jon murmured. Maybe the man who bears the truth should speak it himself. He lowered the torch, casting Lyanna's features back into deeper shadow. As he turned to go, his gaze caught on the face of Ned Stark's statue a few rows back. Stone eyes stared into the dark, unblinking. I'll try to do re-ht by both of you, Jon said, the words barely more than a breath. That's all I know how to do. Ghost rose and fell into step beside him as he made his way back up the stairs, the torchlight dragging their shadows along the crypt walls like reluctant ghosts of their own. Samwell Tarly looked older. That was Jon's first thought when the door to the small council chamber opened and Sam stepped through, shaking melting snow from his cloak. He had shed some of his softness, though not all. There was still a roundness to his face that spoke of comfort, of hearths and bread and books. But the boy's perpetual bafflement had given way to something steadier. His eyes held a depth Jon recognized, the look of a man who had seen too much and gone on anyway. "Jon," Sam breathed. He crossed the room in 3 awkward strides and wrapped his arms around Jon before anyone could remember titles or propriety. Jon stiffened for a heartbeat, then clapped a hand against Sam's back, feeling the solidity of him, the reassuring presence of an old friend in a hall that had begun to feel more like a court. "It's good to see you," Jon said, and meant it. Sam stepped back, cheeks flushed from the fire and the exertion. "You look, well, not well exactly. You look like you could use a good sleep, and a simpler life." Jon huffed a faint laugh. "I don't think they make those in the North anymore." Davos Seaworth closed the door behind Sam, leaving the 6 of them alone. Jon, Sam, Sansa, Arya, Bran, Davos. Ghost lay under the table, his white form barely visible in the dimness. The raven that had arrived with Sam's last letter perched on its stand near the hearth, black eyes bright in the flickering light. Sansa poured Sam a cup of hot ale with cloves and handed it over. "You came quickly," she said. "From the Citadel." Sam wrapped his hands around the cup, savoring the heat. "Archmaester Ibroz said I was making a nuisance of myself," he admitted. "Constant questions, constant requests for access to locked stacks. He suggested I might be of more use back in the North." "Banished for asking too many questions," Arya said dryly. "Sounds like a Tarly." Sam flushed. "I'm a Night's Watchman," he said. "Or I was, or I suppose I still am. I'm not entirely sure how vows work when the order is in transition." "Everything's in transition," Davos muttered. "The whole bloody world." Bran sat quietly by the fire, eyes tracking Sam with a faint, knowing smile. Jon met his look and saw confirmation there. "You wrote letters," Jon said to Sam. "About Rhaegal, about Lyanna, about me." Sam's fingers tightened on the cup. "Yes," he said. "But letters are never enough. Not for something like this. Not for what I found after." "After?" Sansa echoed, her gaze sharpening. Sam set the cup down, leaned his elbows on the table and folded his hands. It was a gesture Jon had seen many times from maesters and lords, but on Sam it felt like armor hastily donned. "I told you about the annulment," Sam said. "About Rhaegar's second marriage. That alone would be enough to change everything we thought we knew about Robert's rebellion. About the Targaryens. About the Starks." He glanced at Sansa, then back at Jon. But there was more in those same ledgers. Notes that seemed odd at first. References to lost cousins and old oaths and funds set aside for voyages to Essos that never took place. He drew a breath. Rhaegal was corresponding with men in the free cities, Sam said. Scholars, nobles, priests of the Red God, warlocks in Karth. He believed the doom of Valyria wasn't just some volcanic accident. He believed it was a wound in the world, one that would fester and bleed until it spilled over into a new long night. Arya snorted softly. And they said I was dramatic. Sam pressed on. He thought the only way to close that wound was to reunite what he called the shards of Valyria, the bloodlines of the dragonlords scattered after the doom. But he also believed that dragon blood alone wasn't enough. That Valyria fell because it forgot there were other powers in the world. Older powers. Ice as well as fire. His eyes flicked to Bran. So he looked for another bloodline, Sam said. One tied to the first men, to the north, to the ancient magics that built the wall. He found it in House Stark. In you, my lady. In your father. In your aunt. Sansa's face had gone very still. Jon could see the muscle jumping in her cheek. He married Lyanna, Sam continued. Not just because he loved her, as some songs say, or because he was a fool, as others claim. He married her because he thought their child would be a bridge between Valyria and the north, between dragons and direwolves, between fire and ice. Jon's hands clenched into fists on the table. I never asked to be anyone's bridge. I know, Sam said softly, but neither did you ask to be a bastard, or a king, or anything else that's been thrown at you. The raven on the stand ruffled its feathers and gave a short, sharp croak. His black eyes were fixed on Jon. So there are others, Jon said. Others with this blood. Dragonlords, you called them. Descendants of dragonlords, Sam corrected. Most of the dragons died when Valyria fell, but some were carried away before it happened. Some noble families fled with them or after them. They hid, changed their names, married into local houses. The purest of those lines were absorbed into the Targaryens over time. He hesitated, but not all. He reached into his satchel and pulled out another scroll, this one rougher, the seal cracked and worn. This came from Volantis, he said, an old mercantile ledger. Several names here match the ones in Rhaegal's correspondence. And in the margin, written in a different hand years later, there's a note. The riders still dream under other skies. When the wolf dragon calls, they will remember their wings. Arya arched a brow. Poetic. Valyrians are like that, Sam said. Even their bookkeeping sounds like prophecy. Jon felt the words like a weight settling on his shoulders. Another stone on the heap. He rubbed at the bridge of his nose. So this is not just about me, he said. It's about uniting these scattered what? Cousins? Strangers? People who have spent generations hiding what they are. Sam nodded. That's what Rhaegal wanted, what he was working toward. He believed a leader with both Stark and Targaryen blood could bring them together, bind them in common cause against the darkness rising in the north. The darkness we already faced, Davos said. That business with the dead isn't exactly a secret anymore. Sam's mouth twitched. Prophecies rarely give exact dates. Perhaps Rhaegal was early. Perhaps the doom and the long night are part of a pattern that repeats. Or perhaps the threat isn't finished, only changed. Bran's voice was soft but clear. The dead were a symptom, he said, not the disease. Jon's head snapped toward him. You told me the Night King was the first White Walker, that he was made by the children to fight the first men. He was, Bran said, but the power they used was older than them, older than the first men, older than the wall. When Valyria fell, it disturbed those older currents, woke things in the far north that had been sleeping. Killing the Night King broke the army he bound to himself, but it did not mend the fabric of the world. He looked at Jon, and for a moment something ancient and vast stared out through the young man's eyes. There will be more winters, Bran said. More shadows. The wall may not stand forever. The dragons may not fly forever. The world needs more than one hero with a sword. Needs structure. It needs houses and bloodlines and oaths that remember what truly matters, even when their children forget. You mean to say, Sansa said slowly, that my brother, our brother, is supposed to gather dragon-blooded nobles from across the sea like sheep and tell them to behave? Sam gave a weak smile. More or less. Jon pushed back his chair. The legs scraped harshly against the stone floor. This is madness, he said. I'm one man. I could barely keep the Night's Watch from tearing itself apart. Barely keep the North from fighting itself while the dead were at the door. And now you want me to cross the sea and tell strangers with dragons in their blood that I'm their king? Their what? Their shepherd. Not their king, Bran said. Their example. That might be worse, Davos muttered. Jon began to pace, the small chamber suddenly too close, the fire too hot on his face. Ghost's eyes followed him, head turning from side to side. He felt their gazes like hands on his back. Sansa's cool, Arya's sharp, Sam's pleading, Davos's weary, Bran's unblinking. Daenerys Targaryen is the Dragon Queen, he said. She has the dragons, the armies, the claim. If anyone is meant to call these people, it's her. Sam winced. What? Jon snapped. Rhaegar's letters were clear, Sam said. He believed the child of his second marriage would be central. Not because of birth order or blood purity, he wasn't that sort of man, but because of the balance he represented. Fire and ice, old and new. He thought that child would be better suited to lead dragonlords than someone raised only in Valyrian ways. Jon stared at him. I was raised in a Stark hall, mocked by northern lords and given a bastard seat at feasts. How in the seven hells does that make me better suited to lead dragonlords? Because you know what it is to have nothing, Arya said quietly. When he looked at her, her gaze did not waver. You know what it is to be on the wrong side of a name, to have to earn every scrap of respect with your own hands instead of an old story. They might listen to you because you won't look down on them from a throne. You'll look them in the eye. Jon swallowed. If they listen at all. If they don't, Bran said, they will burn, or freeze, or both. That's what happens to people who think blood alone will save them. The raven croaked again, shuffling on its perch. One of its feathers drifted down, black against the pale stone. Jon stopped pacing. He looked at Sam, at the scrolls on the table, at the faces of the people who had followed him through death and back. I need to speak with her, he said at last. With Daenerys. Sansa's eyes narrowed. She's in the south, consolidating her hold on King's Landing. She's not exactly inclined to listen to Northern Council at the moment. She'll listen to me, Jon said, though he did not entirely believe it. She has to. This concerns more than just her throne. And if she doesn't? Sansa asked. Then I'll cross the sea without her, Jon said. If there are dragonlords still breathing in those free cities, hiding in their villas and counting their coins, they need to hear that the world has changed. That winter came and was turned away not by dragons alone but by all of us. North and south, ice and fire. He exhaled slowly. I don't want this, he said again, softer now. But it's mine. My mother and father, both of them, made choices that put this on my shoulders long before I was born. I can't set it down without shaming them. Sam's shoulders sagged with relief and worry mingled. You won't be alone, he said. I'll help you. I know some of the names to look for, some of the threads. Bran nodded once, as if this had always been the only possible outcome. The ravens are listening, he said. They'll carry the news faster than any ship. Sansa looked at Jon for a long moment, something unreadable in her eyes. Then she inclined her head. Then we'll prepare for another war of ravens and whispers, she said, and hope this one doesn't end with our home in ashes. The snow had started again by the time Jon and Sansa took to the courtyard. Fat flakes drifted down from a low, iron-gray sky, settling on cloaks and hair and stone. Men went about their business with collars turned up and shoulders hunched, the clatter of buckets and the mutter of voices muffled by the soft blanket forming underfoot. Jon and Sansa walked in a narrow track between the stables and the armory. ghost darted ahead, leaving his own set of prints. For a few strides, neither of them spoke. The silence between them was not the comfortable quiet of siblings who had learned to share space. It was sharp and thin, stretched taut by what had been said in the hall and in the chamber, by what had been revealed and what it might mean. "You agreed too quickly," Sansa said at last. Jon glanced at her. Snowflakes clung to her lashes, to the loose strands of hair that had escaped her braids. Her cheeks were flushed from the cold, her eyes bright. She looked every inch the Lady of Winterfell, a Stark of the North, anchored and sure. "It didn't feel quick to me," he said. "It felt like admitting something that's been chasing me since the Wall." "You always do this," she said. "You hear some terrible burden, and before anyone can breathe, you say, 'Yes, I'll carry it.' If I don't, who will?" Jon asked. "Bran can see, but he can't ride across the sea and stare down dragonlords. Arya can put a knife in anyone's ribs, but I don't think that's what this calls for. And you, I can keep the North from tearing itself apart while you chase ghosts across the narrow sea," Sansa finished. "I know my role, Jon. I'm not asking you to shirk yours. I'm asking you not to leave me alone to defend a people who might decide they don't trust us anymore." They passed a group of men repairing a broken cartwheel. The men stepped back, heads bowing, but their eyes flicked up, curious and wary. Jon caught a scrap of whispered conversation. "Targaryen, they say, dragon blood," before the wind snatched it away. "They already don't trust me," Jon said. "Some of them, at least. If we hide this, if they learn later from someone else, that distrust will turn to hatred." "Hiding is different from managing how they hear it," Sansa said. "From who tells the story first. You know as well as I do that stories matter more than facts in halls like these." Jon thought of old Nan, her voice weaving tales of the long night and the White Walkers so vivid, he'd felt the cold seep into his bones. He thought of the songs the bards sang of Robert's rebellion, of the gallant usurper and the mad dragon prince who stole a maiden's honor, of how those songs had obscured what truly happened in a tower in Dorne. "I'm not good at stories," Jon said. "I know how to tell the truth. Beyond that, then let me do what I'm good at," Sansa said. "Let me shape the story so that when you leave, the North doesn't see a traitor turning his back on them. They see a Stark answering a call that began here with our blood." With Lyanna, they reached the low wall that overlooked the training yard. Below, a handful of boys and older men were taking turns with wooden swords, their movements clumsy but earnest. The sharp crack of wood on wood punctuated the soft hush of the falling snow. Jon leaned his forearms on the cold stone. "Heir to the Iron Throne," he said. "If the laws of men still mean anything after all we've seen, they mean something to men who've never seen beyond their own keeps," Sansa said. "Cersei is dead. Daenerys sits in King's Landing. But there will be lords and ladies in the Reach and the Westerlands and the Stormlands who remember oaths sworn to Targaryens, who remember what dragons did to their ancestors. A man who can claim both the North and the South." She shook her head. "You terrify them, Jon, even if you don't mean to." He watched a boy in the yard slip and fall, his wooden sword skidding across the snow. The other boys laughed until the master-at-arms barked at them. The fallen boy climbed to his feet, jaw set, and retrieved his weapon. "I never wanted to terrify anyone," Jon said. "I wanted to keep them alive." Sansa's voice softened. "You did. You have. But men don't stop fearing shadows just because the biggest monster in the dark is dead." She turned to face him fully, her hand coming to rest lightly on his arm. "Promise me something," she said. Jon met her gaze. "What?" "Promise me you won't come back to us thinking only as a Targaryen," she said. "That you won't let these dragonlords, if they exist, fill your head with talk of destiny and conquest until you forget what winter feels like in your bones. You're the only man I've ever known who could ride a dragon and still scowl like a Northman in the snow. I need you to stay that man." A ghost of a smile tugged at one corner of Jon's mouth. "I don't think anyone could make me stop scowling," he said. "Not even a dragon." "Especially not a dragon," Sansa said. Ghost hopped up onto the wall beside them, claws scratching on the stone, and stared out at the yard. One of the boys below glanced up, saw the direwolf's red gaze fixed on him, and promptly overbalanced into the snow again. "You once told me I was your family," Jon said quietly, "when we met again at the gate, before all of this." "You are my family," Sansa said. "Then remember that when they start whispering about dragon kings in the south," Jon said. "When someone comes to you with a letter saying I've been offered a crown I never wanted, or that I've accepted something that frightens you, remember that I didn't choose this blood. I chose you, the North, Winterfell." Sansa's eyes shone brighter than the reflected light of the snow. "I will," she said, and there was steel behind the softness. "And I'll remind anyone who forgets." A horn sounded faintly from the walls, signaling the closing of the outer gates for the night. Men began to hurry a little faster, eager to find fires and food before the dark settled fully. "You'll need ships," Sansa said, "and ravens, and a way to make sure no one in King's Landing decides to chain you the moment you set foot in the harbor." Jon grimaced. "One thing at a time." Sansa's mouth curved. "This is my way of saying I'll help. Don't make me say it plainly." He smiled just a little. Then the smile faded. "Whatever I find across the sea," Jon said. "Whatever these dragonlords are now, whatever they want to be, I'll bring the truth of it back to you. I won't make promises to them that I can't answer for here." "That's all I can ask," Sansa said. They stood there for a while, watching the boys in the yard swing their wooden swords. Snow gathered on their shoulders, on Ghost's fur, on the walls. Winterfell breathed around them, old and enduring. For all the talk of dragon blood and prophecies, of Valyria and distant lords, it was this stone and snow and stubborn life that anchored Jon. That would always anchor him, no matter what wings he might one day find unfurling at his back. The chamber was small and spare, its stone walls rough and unadorned save for a single faded tapestry of a direwolf chasing a stag. A narrow window overlooked the inner courtyard, its shutters thrown open despite the cold to let in the faint sounds of Winterfell's night. Distant voices, the creak of wood, the occasional bark of a dog. Snow drifted past the window in slow, lazy spirals, catching the light of the candle on the table between Jon and Arya. The flame danced, its reflection wavering in the dark glass. Arya sat with her back against the wall, legs drawn up, needle resting across her knees. She ran a cloth along the blade with absent care, the way another girl might stroke a cat. Her face was in shadow, but her eyes gleamed when she glanced up at Jon. "So," she said, "you're a dragon." Jon huffed. "That's what they tell me." "You don't look like a dragon," Arya observed. "You still look like a sulky wolf with too much hair." "You haven't exactly grown wings yourself," Jon said. Arya smirked. "I don't need wings. I have feet. And faces." The candle crackled. Jon watched the flame for a moment, then said, "Does it change anything? For you?" Arya tilted her head. "You mean, do I suddenly see you as some shiny prince instead of my idiot brother, who used to let me wear his cloak and taught me to hold a sword?" She shook her head. "No, you're still you. You just have a worse name now." He blinked. "A worse name?" "Aegon," she said, making a face. "It sounds like you're choking on a chicken bone." "Jon is better. Short, sharp, suits you." "That was your aunt and uncle's doing," Jon said. "Not mine." "Then we'll blame them," Arya said. "They're dead. They can't protest." Jon laughed despite himself, a brief, rough sound. Arya watched him, the faintest softening in her eyes. "You're worried they'll stop loving you," she said. "The North, Sansa, the men who follow you. That they'll see dragon instead of wolf." "I'm worried they'll stop trusting me," Jon said. "Love, that's never been something I counted on from anyone but a few. Trust is what keeps men from putting a knife in your back when you turn around, or from walking away when you ask them to stand in the snow until their toes blacken." Arya's fingers stilled on Needle's hilt. "Trust can be harder to keep than love," she said. You would know, Jon said. You've worn enough faces to see how quickly people change theirs. She smiled, but there was no humor in it. People are strange. They'll forgive you killing for them before they'll forgive you lying to them, even if the lies were told to keep them safe. Do you think I lied? Jon asked quietly. By not knowing who I was? Arya looked at him for a long moment, then shook her head. You can't lie about something you didn't know, she said. But you can lie about who you'll be now that you do know. He considered that. The candle flame guttered as a draft slipped through the shutters. When I was in Bravos, Arya said, the kindly man told me I had to be no one, that I had to give up Arya Stark if I wanted to wear other faces. I tried. I took the beatings. I said the words. But in the end, I couldn't. I kept a list. I clung to my anger, to my love. Her mouth twisted. They said that made me weak, that I'd never be a good servant of the many-faced God. I'm glad they were right, Jon said. So am I, Arya replied, because being no one felt like being nothing. But when I came home and you called me little sister, and Sansa looked at me like she was seeing a ghost, I realized something else. What? I realized I can be Arya Stark and still wear other faces, she said. I can be many things at once. I'm a girl who learned to dance with swords and bravos, and I'm a wolf of the north, and I'm the child who liked lemon cakes and climbing in stories. None of those pieces cancel the others. They just sit together, like stones in a wall. She tapped Needle's blade lightly. You don't have to be Jon or Aegon, wolf or dragon. You can be both. You can be all of it. That sounds like a good way to be torn apart, Jon said. It's a good way to be bigger than anyone expects, Arya said. The men who trust you now trust Jon Snow. The dragonlords you're supposed to find will respect Aegon Targaryen. Let them both be true. Let them both be you. Then decide which pieces you'll listen to when someone asks you to do something that feels wrong. Jon studied her. You speak like a maester, Arya snorted. Sam can keep his books. I prefer smaller problems, like which part of a man to stab so he stops talking fastest. That's not exactly comforting, Jon said. It shouldn't be, Arya replied, but it's honest. She laid Needle across her lap and leaned forward, elbows on her knees. You know there's one more thing that hasn't changed, she said. What's that? You'll still die if someone sticks a sword through you, she said matter-of-factly. Dragon blood or no. So when you go chasing these dragonlords, remember that you're not immortal. Don't start thinking the stories make you invincible. I'm fairly sure dying once cured me of that, Jon said dryly. Good. Arya's gaze softened again. Then promise me something too. Everyone wants promises tonight, Jon murmured. What is it? Promise me that if the dragon part of you ever wants to burn something that the wolf part of you knows shouldn't burn, she said. You'll listen to the wolf. He thought of Daenerys standing before the gates of King's Landing, of dragonfire licking at stone, of screams and smoke. He thought of the way her jaw had clenched when she spoke of breaking wheels. I will, he said. And if you don't, Arya added calmly, I'll be there, with Needle, just in case. Jon searched her face, saw no jest there, and felt a strange mixture of comfort and unease. You're a terrible little sister, he said. I'm the only one you've got, she said. Terrible or not. They fell into silence, again watching the snow. Somewhere in the courtyard below, a raven flapped its wings and took to the sky, black against the white. Jon found his gaze drawn to it, to the way it cut through the falling snow as if there were paths in the air only it could see. Bran says the ravens are listening, he said, that they carry more than words now, that they carry knowledge. Warnings. Arya shrugged. Bran says a lot of strange things. Half of them sound mad until they turn out to be true. The candle burned low. The snow fell. The world outside Winterfell's walls was vast and full of threats Jon could barely imagine. But here, in this small room, with Needle on Arya's lap and the ghost of a smile on her lips, he felt, for a fleeting, fragile moment, like a brother again. Not a king, not a prince, Not a dragon, just Jon. Dawn came grudgingly to Winterfell, a smudge of pale light pushing its way through a sky still heavy with cloud. The snow had stopped in the deepest hours of the night, leaving the world muffled and new. Frost clung to the ramparts, the stones slick underfoot. Jon Snow stood on the southern wall, cloak pulled tight around him, breath steaming in slow gusts. Ghost sat at his side, tail curled around his paws, ears pricked toward the horizon as if he expected something to materialize out of the gray. Below, the castle was stirring. Men moved through the courtyards in small knots, their shapes dark against the white ground. Smoke rose from chimneys, the thin plumes catching the first slanting rays of the sun. The sound of wood being chopped, of doors opening and closing, of distant voices carried faintly up to the wall. From the rookery, a cloud of ravens burst into the air all at once, as if something had startled them. They wheeled over the courtyard, then fanned out in all directions, north, west, east, and south. A few circled the towers once, cawing harshly, before setting off after their companions. Jon watched them go, their black forms stark against the washed-out sky. Somewhere among them, messages would be carried to White Harbor and the Dreadfort, to Bear Island and the Rills. Some would cross the narrow sea, their wings beating over gray waves towards strange coasts and stranger cities. He wondered if the dragonlords Sam spoke of would recognize the feel of those ravens when they arrived. If some old instinct in their blood would prickle, telling them that the world they had hidden from was coming to knock on their doors. He wondered if they would answer. The wind tugged at his cloak, working cold fingers into any gap it could find. Jon rested his hands on the rough stone of the battlement and leaned forward slightly, eyes tracking the southern line where the white of the snow met the darker smear of distant hills. Somewhere beyond that horizon lay the Neck, the Trident, the King's Road, and eventually the narrow sea. Beyond that, Dragonstone, with its black volcanic towers and carved dragons perched on every parapet. Beyond that still Essos, sprawling and fractured and ancient. He had thought once that his world ended at the wall, that beyond it lay only wildlings and dead men and endless ice. He had believed the south a distant, strange place with little to do with him. Now the world seemed to have expanded in all directions at once, stretching beyond any map he had ever seen. "You're thinking too loudly." Bran's voice made him start. Jon turned to see his younger brother, or what remained of the boy he had known, seated in his chair near the stairway, wrapped in furs. A guard stood a respectful distance away, hands tucked under his armpits for warmth. "Did they carry you up here?" Jon asked. Bran gave him a look. "I still have arms," he said, "and a chair. Not wings yet." Jon moved to join him. The guard took the hint and withdrew a few paces further, turning his back to give them privacy. "You shouldn't be out in this cold," Jon said. "The cold doesn't bother me the way it used to," Bran said. "Not when I'm seeing through other eyes half the time. The ravens don't feel it, nor the wolves." Ghost thumped his tail once, as if in agreement. "You said they're listening," Jon said, nodding toward the sky where the last of the ravens were becoming specks. "That they carry more than words written on parchment. They carry will," Bran said. "Direction, focus. The old gods don't speak in sentences, Jon. They speak in patterns, in flocks, in the way branches grow and rivers curve. When I send the ravens, I'm not just telling them where to go. I'm telling the world to pay attention to what flies on their wings." Jon frowned. "And what flies now?" "The truth," Bran said simply. "That Lyanna Stark's son lives. That Rhaegar's line did not end with fire and rubble on the Trident. That the blood of Valyria and the blood of the first men share a single heart." He looked at Jon with eyes that seemed to hold reflections of things Jon could not see. "They will feel you across the sea," Bran said. "Those old families who still whisper in High Valyrian when the doors are closed. The ones who light candles before shrines of dragons no one else remembers. They'll have dreams. They'll see wolves in their fires. Some will be afraid. Some will be curious. And some will decide they'd rather kill me than answer my call," Jon said. "Yes," Bran agreed without flinching. Some will, but you've faced worse odds. Jon's mouth tugged wryly. You see that in your visions? I see you standing in halls I don't recognize, Bran said, wearing furs and black leather, not silk, with dragons roaring overhead and strange banners on the walls. Sometimes you're alone, sometimes you're not. Sometimes the sky is full of ash. Sometimes it's clear. That's not helpful, Jon said. Bran shrugged, the movement slight under his furs. The future is never helpful. It's only honest. They stood in silence for a while. The last raven disappeared into the southern haze. A gust of wind sent a sheet of snow tumbling from the crenellations. Do you resent him? Jon asked suddenly. Ned, for the lie he kept, for making you what you are now. Bran's gaze turned inward, as if he were listening to something only he could hear. I resented many things, he said slowly. When I woke from my fall, when I realized I would never walk again, when I saw my father's head on a spike in King's Landing, when I trudged north of the wall, chasing stories. Resentment is small, Jon. It shrinks you. It makes it hard to see anything beyond your own hurt. He looked up at Jon. I don't have room for it anymore, Bran said. There's too much else in my head. Too many lives and deaths and choices. Ned Stark lied to protect a child. That lie had consequences. Some good, some terrible. So will the truth. That's all, Joe. And absorbed that. The simplicity of it felt like the surface of deep water. He loved you, Bran added, as if sensing the shape of Jon's doubt. Both of you, in his own dour, honorable way. He died for his honor, Jon said. He died for his choice, Bran corrected. Honor is just the name men give to the choices they're willing to bleed for. Jon thought of his own choices, the ones that had led him to a noose at Castle Black, to a dragon's back, to a battlefield of ice and flame. He wondered what name history would give them, if it bothered to remember them at all. I'll go to her, he said, to Daenerys. I'll tell her what we've learned, and I'll ask for ships to Essos, for safe passage. Bran nodded. She already knows more than you think, he said. The dragons told her something when you rode with her. They smelled your blood. Jon raised a brow. Dragons smell blood. They know their own, Bran said. They remember things their riders forget. The wind picked up, tugging at Bran's hair. The guard shifted his weight, stamping his feet. I'll leave Winterfell in a few days, Jon said. Once we've put things in order. Once the North has heard the story from our lips, not from some wandering bard. Good, Bran said. The sooner you go, the less time the world has to twist this into something uglier. Jon looked south one last time, as if he might catch a glimpse of black sails or wheeling dragons on the horizon. All my life, he said, I've been trying to find a place where I belonged. The Wall, the Watch, the Wildlings, Winterfell. Now they tell me there's a place for me across the sea, in cities I've never seen, among people who've never heard my name. Feels like another story, another man's life. Bran's lips curved faintly. Perhaps it is, he said. But remember, Jon, every story you've ever loved was made of many lives, many places. You're allowed to be more than one thing. Ghost pressed his head against Jon's hand. Jon scratched behind his ears, feeling the familiar roughness of his fur, the solid reality of him. I won't leave him, Jon said. Not again. He'll go where you go, Bran said. Wolves and dragons remember their bonds, even when men forget. The sun pushed a little higher, a pale coin behind the clouds. The day was properly begun now. Orders would need to be given, preparations set in motion. Ravens answered, stores checked, weapons inspected. But for a moment longer, Jon stood on the wall with his brother and his wolf, watching the place where the ravens had vanished into the south. He felt the world shifting under his feet, the old certainties cracking like river ice in spring. He did not know if he was ready. He did not know if anyone ever was. He only knew that the North had given him a name and a purpose when he had nothing, and that now, for some reason he did not fully understand, the wider world was calling that name back to him in another tongue. Aegon, Jon, Wolf, Dragon. He would answer as all of them. By evening, the Solar had become a battlefield of parchment. Maps lay unfurled across the long table, Westeros in one sweep, Essos in another, their coastlines curling like old scars. Stones and carved figures marked key points: Winterfell, White Harbor, Dragonstone, King's Landing, Bravos, Pentos, Volantis. The light from the hearth and the candelabra turned the inked rivers to gleaming black snakes, the mountains of the moon to ragged shadows. Jon Snow stood at the head of the table, palms braced on the wood. His eyes moved from one marked city to the next, trying to imagine the miles between them, the seas, the storms. Ghost lay near the fire, head resting on his paws, ears flicking at the murmur of voices. Samwell Tarly pointed to a cluster of cities along the Essos coast. Here, he said, Lys, Myr, Volantis, all places where old Valyrian bloodlines took root after the Doom. Not all of them of true dragonlord stock, but many who claim some tie. Some of those might be lies, some might be embellished, but where there are lies, there's usually a grain of truth. Volantis is full of old families who'd slit their own throats if it meant their house could claim a drop of dragon blood, Davos Seaworth said. They're not exactly the sort to unite behind anyone. They'd sooner poison each other. That's why we start small, Sam said. Rhaegar's letters mentioned certain names as more reliable. Houses that kept to themselves, smaller but proud. Families who never quite let go of their dreams of dragons, even when it was dangerous to dream them. He tapped 2 points on the map, one near Lys, another farther inland. Here, and here, they were minor when Valyria stood. Now they're merchants, captains, small-time magisters. But they'll have stories, genealogies, relics. Relics! Arya, lounging on a windowsill, perked up. Like dragon skulls? More likely old books, Sam said. Seals with 3-headed dragons. Swords with a particular curve to the blade. Names that don't fit the local tongue. Boring relics, then, Arya said. I'll stay home. You're not invited, Sansa Stark said dryly, though her tone held fondness. Someone has to keep you from stabbing anyone who looks at you wrong. Arya smirked and went back to watching the snow drift past the window. Jon's hand moved to the small painted island of Dragonstone. The carved dragon that usually stood over it, a marker for Daenerys' armies, sat off to the side, as if waiting to be placed somewhere new. I'll have to go there first, Jon said, before I cross the sea. If Daenerys doesn't agree to this, it will be twice as hard to convince anyone in Essos to listen to me. They'll see division where we need unity. Sansa nodded. She'll want to know exactly what you mean to offer these people, she said, and what you mean to offer her. Jon's jaw tightened. I have nothing to offer but truth, he said, and the promise that if we don't put aside pride and old grudges, winter will come again in a form we're not ready for. That might not be enough for a queen who just took a city with dragonfire, Davos said quietly, but it might be enough for the woman who lost a dragon to the dead and still came north to fight. Sam shifted. There's something else, he said reluctantly. In Rhaegar's notes, he believed the dragonlords, those who still remember what they once were, would respond to strength, to someone who not only shares their blood but commands dragons. Jon's eyes flicked to him. You mean her dragons, he said. Not me. Her dragons, Sam agreed. But you rode one, Jon. They let you. That means something to people who see dragons as more than weapons. It means you're not just another lord with a claim. You're part of a pattern they understand. A pattern that ended with a city in flames, Sansa said, her voice tight. Jon looked at her, then away. The memory of kings landing under dragonfire flickered in his mind. Not as first-hand experience, but as stories brought north, as broken men and women who had wandered into Winterfell's orbit with burned scars and hollow eyes. I won't let that happen again, he said. Not if I can help it. You might not be able to, Sansa said softly, Promise me you'll remember that you're not responsible for every choice other people make with their power. If you try to hold all of it, you'll break." Jon thought of the wall again, of the night he had stood atop it and felt the weight of the world pressing down, of the sense, half terror and half exultation, that he stood between life and death. "I'm already broken," he said. "This is just another crack." Bran Stark spoke from his corner by the fire. "Cracks let light in," he said. Sansa rolled her eyes slightly, but there was affection in it. "You're getting worse," she told him. Bran smiled, a small, secret thing. Jon straightened. "We'll send word to White Harbor," he said. "Ask Wyman Manderley for ships, enough to carry a small retinue to Dragonstone. I won't go with an army. That would be provocation." Davos nodded. "A few good men, then," he said. "Ones who can hold their own if things go sour, but who won't look like an invasion. I can pick them. Men who've seen too much to be easily impressed by southern tricks." "I'll come," Sam said. Jon opened his mouth to protest, but Sam raised a hand. "You'll need someone who can read old Valyrian ledgers without making a fool of himself," he said. "Someone who knows which families were where when the doom fell. Someone who can remind you that not every man with silver in his hair is a dragonlord." Jon closed his mouth. "All right," he said. "But if we get eaten by a dragon, I'm blaming you." Sam gulped. "That's fair." Sansa moved one of the carved direwolf tokens to rest firmly over Winterfell. "While you're gone, I'll speak with the Northern Lords," she said. "I'll tell them the story in a way that doesn't make them reach for their spears. I'll remind them that whatever your blood, you've already bled for them more than any man has a right to." "They'll still grumble," Davos said. "It's what lords do." "I don't mind grumbling," Sansa said, "as long as they don't decide to crown someone else while my back is turned." Arya smiled, a flash of teeth. "They'd have to get through me first." Bran's gaze drifted over the map, then out the window, as if he were seeing far beyond the walls. "This is only the beginning," he said. "The first step of a long road." Jon's hand settled on the space between Winterfell and Dragonstone, fingers spanning the painted sea. He pressed down hard enough that the parchment crinkled. "I know," he said, "but beginnings are all we ever have. The rest we make as we go." Ghost shifted by the fire as if in agreement. The raven on the back of the chair croaked, hopping from one foot to the other. "You're not alone," Sam said again, more firmly. "Remember that, Jon. Even if you're standing in a hall full of dragonlords who'd rather measure your blood than your deeds. Remember that there are people here who know who you are, not what you are." "Who?" Jon looked at each of them in turn. Sam, with ink on his fingers and stubborn hope in his eyes. Davos, scarred and steady. Sansa, sharp and resolute. Arya, coiled and dangerous. Bran, distant and deep. Ghost, solid and warm and real. A strange calm settled over him, fragile but present. He drew a breath, let it out. "Then we'll begin," he said. "With Dragonstone, with Daenerys, with whoever is willing to listen." He lifted his hand from the map. The candlelight flickered, throwing shadows across the painted seas. Far beyond Winterfell's walls, on coasts he had never seen, men and women with old blood in their veins stirred in their sleep. Some dreamed of wolves running through marble halls. Some dreamed of dragons with eyes like northern storms. Some woke with their hearts pounding, the taste of snow and ash on their tongues. The wolf dragon had been named. Soon he would be seen. Winterfell's gate yawned open like the mouth of some ancient stone beast, its iron teeth rimed with frost. Dawn leaked through in a thin, gray smear, not yet strong enough to lift the deeper shadows from the yard. The snow underfoot was new and clean, unmarked save for the prints of the horses being led into place and the heavy boots of the men seeing them off. Jon Snow stood by his horse, gloved hand resting on the animal's neck. The mare's breath came in puffs of steam, visible in the cold. Ghost walked a slow circle around them, restless, eyes red as embers in the half-light. Samwell tarly fussed with the straps of a bulging saddlebag, muttering to himself. Ink, parchment, spare quills, herbs for seasickness. For you, not me. I'm perfectly fine on ships. Usually 7 hells, where did I put that? Davos Seaworth took pity on him and tugged the strap tight. You've packed half the Citadel, lad, he said. Any more and the horse will sink before the ship leaves port. Sam flushed. It's hard to know what one might need when one is about to try to convince hidden dragonlords to come out of hiding. Start with not saying it quite like that, Davos advised. At the base of the gatehouse, Bran Stark's chair had been placed where the stones were least uneven. A fur-lined cloak swaddled his thin frame. He watched the preparations with calm eyes that seemed older than the walls themselves. Sansa Stark stood beside him, her gloved hand resting lightly on the back of the chair, her other arm wrapped around herself against the cold. Arya Stark lurked just behind, hood up, expression unreadable. Jon tightened the cinch on his saddle and turned. For a moment, he simply looked at them. At the curve of Sansa's mouth as she pressed it into something like a smile, at the set of Arya's shoulders, at Bran's 2 still hands. This feels familiar, Jon said, forcing a rough humor into his voice as he approached them. Me riding south while you glare at me from the gate. It didn't go well last time, Sansa said. I'd be a fool not to glare. He stopped in front of her. If it comforts you, he said, I'm not going alone this time. Sansa's eyes flicked to Sam and Davos, then back. You weren't alone before, she said. You had men, allies, a queen with dragons. That didn't stop you from dying once and nearly dying twice more. Arya snorted softly. At this rate, you'll start treating death like a bad habit you can't quite kick. Bran's mouth twitched, though he said nothing. I'll try not to make a habit of it, Jon said. His gaze softened. You know why I have to go. Sansa exhaled, the breath a pale cloud. Because you can't be still when there's work to be done, she said. Because our aunt fell in love with a dragon and our father chose a lie over a boy's life. And the consequences of that have finally caught up with us. Because the world doesn't care that we've done enough already. That, and because Sam found proof that I might be the only man stubborn enough to get dragonlords to listen, Jon said. Sam gave a strangled sound. I didn't write that part, he protested. Not exactly. I implied it. The Valyrians implied it. The scrolls. We understand, Sam, Sansa cut in gently. Arya stepped forward, the snow crunching beneath her boots. She wore a simple leather jerkin under her cloak, needle at her hip. If you die again, she told Jon, I'm going to be very cross. It's hard to avenge a man who won't stay in his grave. I'll do my best to save you the trouble, Jon said. He pulled her into a quick, fierce embrace. For all her sharpness, she yielded to it, arms wrapping around him with bone-cracking strength before she shoved him back. Don't let them make you into something you're not, she said. If they start talking about crowns, remember how heavy they sit on flayed heads. I've seen enough heads on spikes to last a lifetime, Jon said. Sansa stepped in next. She didn't hug him immediately. She stood, searching his face as if committing every line to memory. If I hear one whisper that you've decided to claim the Iron Throne, she said quietly enough that only he could hear, I will send ravens to every lord in the north and remind them that dragons burned our people once before. If that day comes, Jon murmured, I'll deserve it. Her eyes glistened for a heartbeat. Then she lifted her chin. Come back to us, she said. Not as a dragon lord, as my brother. He drew her into his arms then. She was stiff for a moment and then melted, her cheek pressing against his furs. I'll always be that, he said into her hair. Whatever else I become. When he let her go, Bran held out his hand. Jon knelt so their eyes were level and took it. Bran's fingers were cool and dry, the grip unexpectedly firm. I'll watch, Bran said, through ravens, through other eyes. If you forget who you are, I'll remind you. I'm not sure I like the sound of that, Jon said, but there was a crooked smile on his face. You never did like being watched, Bran replied. Davos cleared his throat. "The road to White Harbor won't grow shorter while we stand here," he said. "Best we move before the snow gets any thicker." Jon rose, gave his family one last look, and then swung into the saddle. The mare stamped, eager to be moving. Ghost trotted to the gate, already claiming the path as theirs. The outer gate creaked as the chains were hauled. The world beyond the walls was a blur of white and gray and bare, black trees. Jon looked back only once. Sansa stood straight and still, Bran's hand in hers, Arya a sharp shadow at her side. For a moment, he saw them as the old songs would have painted them. Lady Winterfell, the three-eyed raven, the assassin wolf, and himself as something else entirely, a dark rider carrying too many names. Then the gate swallowed them, and the road to White Harbor stretched out ahead. White Harbor smelled of salt and smoke and fish, the air damp and heavy even in winter. The Manderley city spread up from the water in tiers of white stone stained gray by years of sea wind, its walls bristling with spears and pennants. Ships bobbed in the harbor, deep-bellied cogs, lean longships, fishing boats, with sails furled and rigging creaking like old bones. Jon Snow dismounted at the foot of the Merman's Court, the great hall that overlooked the harbor. His breath puffed in the chill air as he took in the sight of the ships Lord Wyman Manderley had mustered. 3 stout cogs flying both the leaping merman and the direwolf, their hulls tar-black and ready. "They're small," Samwell Tarly said under his breath. "Small ships are less likely to catch fire," Davos Seaworth replied, "and less likely to draw the wrong sort of eye. And more likely to sink," Sam muttered, then flushed when Jon glanced at him. "I mean, they're excellent ships, of course. Very ship-like." Lord Wyman Manderley descended the hall steps with surprising grace for a man of his size. His cloak of ermine and gray wool billowed around him, and his many chins wobbled when he smiled. "Your Grace," he said, bowing as deeply as his girth allowed. "Or should I say, Your Grace twice over now, if half the tales from the road are true." Jon's shoulders tightened. "I'm still Jon Snow, my lord," he said. "King in the north, if the north will have me. Whatever else people choose to say is complicated." "Complications are like bones in a fish," Wyman said. "You learn to pick around them or you choke." Come. "We'll talk where the wind doesn't slice the words out of your mouth." Inside the Merman's Court, fires roared in twin hearths beneath a vaulted ceiling painted with waves and mermaids. Wyman led them to a smaller solar overlooking the harbor, its windows thick with warped glass. From here, Jon could see the ships more clearly, the way the crew moved on deck, the crates being loaded, the barrels rolled up gangplanks. "You asked for ships to Dragonstone," Wyman said, easing himself into a heavy chair that creaked ominously, "to treat with the Dragon Queen about matters best left to southern tongues. I gave you 3. You ask for 3 ships now to sail beyond, to lands where men wear silk and plot with poison instead of steel. I give you the same 3, and captains who won't wet themselves at the sight of a dragon's shadow." He gestured with a fleshy hand toward Davos. "And I give you the Onion Knight, who knows those waters better than most who still live." "I'll try not to sink them," Davos said dryly. Wyman's eyes shifted to Jon. "What I can't give you," he said, "is certainty that the men whose blood runs hotter than ours will welcome a Stark who's half a dragon into their councils. There are murmurings, tales slip through the cracks faster than fish guts. They say you're heir to the Iron Throne now, that you could call half the realm to your banner if you wished." "Tales," Jon said. "We both know how unreliable those can be." "Unreliable, yes," Wyman agreed, "but not always wrong. I bent the knee to you because I saw a man who put his body between the living and the dead. I saw my son's killer brought low. I saw a future where the North could stand on its own feet with a Stark at its head. Now they whisper that Stark is also dragon." He steepled his fingers. "Dragons don't have a good history with my city, Your Grace, or with the North." Jon leaned forward, forearms on his knees. "I know," he said. "I remember the stories, but I'm not going south to gather armies. I'm going to gather something else. Knowledge. Allies who understand what we faced here." Men and women who still remember what dragonlords were supposed to be before madness and greed rotted them. And if those allies decide you'd make a better dragon king than the one who sits on the Iron Throne now? Wyman asked, gaze sharp. Jon's jaw tightened. Then they'll be disappointed, he said. I have no wish for that throne. I've seen what wanting it does to people. If any of these dragonlords want to follow someone, let them follow an idea instead. The idea that power isn't worth much if the world under your feet freezes or burns. Wyman studied him for a long moment. Outside, a gull shrieked and swooped past the window. You sound like a man who's already been king and found no joy in it, the Lord of White Harbor said at last. I sound like a man who's tired, Jon replied. Tired of being told what I'm meant to be instead of asked what I'm willing to do. Sam shifted on his feet, then cleared his throat. My lord, he said, when we fought the dead, we didn't ask whether a man's blood was northern or southern, whether he prayed to the old gods or the new, whether his father knelt to Aegon or Robert or no one at all. We needed every sword, every hand on a dragonglass spear. Wyman's gaze flicked to him. And you think the same will be true for whatever comes next? Sam nodded. The long night may have passed, but the wound that led it in hasn't healed. Jonathan. Whatever we call him, he's uniquely placed to speak to those who can help stitch it closed. The North can't do that alone. Neither can a queen sitting on a broken throne. The big lord's fingers drummed once on the arm of his chair. Then he sighed, the sound like a bellows deflating. I'm too old to set foot on a ship again, Wyman said. My bones protest if I stand up too quickly, let alone if I ask them to rock about on the sea for weeks on end. But if I were 20 years younger, I'd be tempted. If only to see the look on those silk wearers' faces when a Northman walks into their halls with a direwolf and a claim they can't ignore. He waved his hand. You'll have your ships. I'll see them provisioned with food that doesn't taste like fish piss, which is more than the usual sailor's fare. I'll tell the captains to follow your Onion Knight and to listen to him Hen, he says, turn back or press on. And I'll say a prayer to whatever god is listening that when you return, you come back as Jon Stark of Winterfell and not a man with dragons at his back and conquest in his eyes. Jon inclined his head. That's all I can ask, my lord. Wyman's mouth curved. Oh, I suspect the gods will ask more. From the window, Jon watched as men moved across the docks, loading the final barrels, checking ropes, shouting to one another. The ships rocked gently, as if impatient. Somewhere far to the south, across the cold, gray waters, an island of stone and fire waited. The sea was another kind of winter. He would have to cross both. The ship groaned like a wounded animal as it climbed another swell and slid down into the trough. Spray lashed the deck, stinging exposed skin and freezing in place wherever it landed. The sails strained against the wind, lines creaking, canvas snapping with each gust. Jon Snow braced himself at the bow, one hand gripping the rail so tightly his knuckles ached. The sea heaved before them, black as ink under a low, roiling sky. Lightning flickered in the distance, turning the waves into tumbling, silver-edged beasts for a heartbeat before plunging them back into darkness. Behind him, Samwell Tarly clung to a barrel with both arms, his face a shade of green that did not occur naturally in the north. I thought, he managed between bouts of swallowing hard, that if I looked at the horizon, it would help. Has it? Jon asked, raising his voice over the wind. Sam glared weakly at the churning water. No. Davos Seaworth stood by the helmsman, feet planted wide, his good hand resting on the worn wood of the rail. His voice cut through the storm as he barked orders, and the sailors moved with the economy of men long used to the sea's moods. This storm wasn't the worst Davos had known. Jon could tell by the set of his shoulders, but it was bad enough to make even the old salt frown. Ghost stayed low to the deck, claws scraping as he adjusted his stance with each roll of the ship. His fur was soaked, plastered to his lean frame, but he kept his eyes on the horizon, teeth bared in a silent challenge to the waves. Jon watched the lightning flare again, closer this time. For an instant, The jagged bolt outlined a shape in the clouds that made his breath catch. A vast, winged shadow that was surely nothing more than a trick of light and fear, but that nevertheless brought to mind dragons wheeling over battlefields, their roars drowned by thunder. "Storms used to frighten me," Sam said, voice small. "At Horn Hill, when thunder rattled the windows, I'd hide in the library. My father said it was unmanly." Jon glanced back at him. "What doesn't your father think is unmanly?" Sam managed a weak chuckle. "Very little." Another wave hit the hull, sending a shudder through the ship. The deck tilted. Jon's stomach lurched, but he held on. "I dreamed last night," he said, surprising himself. The words came out as if they'd been waiting behind his teeth. "Of dragons flying over a city I didn't recognize. Not King's Landing, not any place I've seen. The buildings were tall and strange, like knives pointed at the sky. The streets were full of people, all looking up. Some were afraid, some not. And the dragons weren't burning anything. They were just there, like guards." Sam swallowed. "Maybe you dreamed of one of the free cities," he said. "Some of them still carve their palaces in the Valyrian style. And the idea of dragons patrolling the skies, that's not new. In Valyria, they say, it was as common as ravens at a rookery." Jon shook his head. This felt different, like it wasn't the past or the future, just a possibility, a branch that might grow from the trunk if someone chose it. Sam's eyes widened despite the nausea. "You're starting to sound like Bran." "Gods forbid," Jon muttered, though there was no real heat in it. The wind shifted slightly, carrying a smell other than salt and cold. Something faint and sulfurous, like burnt stone. It could have been nothing more than a trick of the storm, some distant volcanic vent stirring the sea. Or it could have been Jon's imagination, primed by talk of Valyria and the old blood. He thought of the doom, of cities swallowed by fire and ash, of dragons screaming as the sky fell in on them. He thought of Rhaegar Targaryen, poring over dusty scrolls and believing that some link bound that ancient catastrophe to the long night. He thought of the weight of expectation on a child born in a tower far from the sea. "You think they're real?" he asked Sam suddenly. "These dragonlords, not just in blood but in their own minds. Do you think there are people across this water who still believe they're meant to ride dragons and rule the world?" Sam wiped his mouth with the back of his hand. "People will believe anything if it gives them a story that makes them feel important," he said. "That they're part of something bigger, that their suffering or their privilege has meaning." "That's not an answer," Jon said. Sam leaned his head back against the barrel, closing his eyes briefly as the ship rose and fell. "All right," he said. "Yes. I think there are men and women in Essos who still light candles to dragon idols and teach their children Valyrian words their neighbors don't understand. I think some of them dream of the days when their ancestors flew. And I think they're dangerous, Jon, because anyone who thinks they're destined for something great is liable to crush a lot of smaller lives under their feet on the way." Jon grunted. "I've seen that." "I know," Sam said softly, "but I also think maybe that not all of them will be monsters. Some might look at the world and see what you see. Ruin, opportunity, the chance to do things differently this time." Lightning flashed again, closer still. Thunder cracked overhead. For a heartbeat, Jon saw the waves lit from within, glowing like molten glass. Then the darkness slammed back down. "You're pinning a lot on maybe," Jon said. "I've pinned more on less," Sam replied. Davos called something to the helmsman, and the ship angled slightly. The pitch of the deck changed. The waves were now hitting them at a different slant. The storm would pass, Jon knew. All storms did. The question was what shape the ship and the men on it would be in when the sky cleared. He tightened his grip on the rail as another wave slapped the hull, sending a spray of freezing water over him. Ghost shook himself, sending droplets flying. Somewhere in the distance, beyond the storm and the reach of any sailor's eye, lay Dragonstone, with its cliffs and dragons and the woman who had once been his queen. Jon wondered which of them the dragons would greet more warily this time. The storm broke sometime before dawn, leaving the sea sullen and exhausted under a sky streaked with cloud. By midday, the water had smoothed to a heavy swell, and a jagged shape rose on the horizon. Dragonstone loomed from the mist like a black fist punching up from the sea. Its cliffs were sheer, their faces pocked with caves where waves smashed themselves into white froth. Atop that stone sat the castle, a tangle of towers and walls, every line of it carved into the likeness of some dragon part. Here a tail wound around a battlement, there a wing flared into a parapet. Stone dragons perched on turrets, teeth bared, eyes hollow. As the northern cogs crept closer, a shadow passed over the deck. Jon looked up. Drogon swept across the sky, vast and terrible. His wings beat the air into submission, each downstroke sending ripples across the water. Sunlight caught on his black scales, turning them to oil-slick rainbows for an instant. Smoke curled from his nostrils as he roared, a sound that rattled Jon's ribs and sent several sailors sprawling. Rhaegal followed, green and bronze, his smaller bulk no less awe-inspiring. He banked more tightly than his brother, weaving between the spires with an ease that spoke of long familiarity. His eyes flashed gold as he turned, and for a heartbeat Jon felt them lock onto him. A phantom sensation burned along his inner thighs and spine, the remembered feel of dragon muscle moving beneath him, of wind tearing at his hair, of the world dropping away as they climbed. He swallowed, throat suddenly dry. 7 bloody hells. One of the sailors whispered, "I thought the tales were half again as big as truth, but they're twice as small," Davos said grimly. "Keep your hands steady. Dragons don't like panic. Or so I'm told." Sam clutched the rail, eyes huge. "They're magnificent," he breathed. "Terrifying, but magnificent." Ghost stood his ground, fur bristling but posture unbowed. The direwolf's lips peeled back in a silent snarl as Drogon roared again, the sound rolling out over the water like thunder. As the ships passed under the shadow of the cliffs, smaller details emerged. The narrow, winding road carved into the rock, the massive stone causeway that led from a sheltered cove up toward the gates. The silhouettes of men along the walls, spears in hand, armor glinting. "They've seen us," Davos said. "Hard not to, with dragons acting as heralds." "Do you think she'll welcome us?" Sam asked. "After everything?" Jon's jaw tightened. "We fought together against the dead," he said. "We bled together. Whatever came after, that's not nothing. Tell that to the men who lost mothers and brothers in King's Landing," Davos muttered. Jon had no answer for that. The memory of ash falling like snow over a shattered city wasn't his own, but he had seen it in others' eyes. He had heard it in the quaver of voices that spoke of streets turned to rivers of fire. He thought of Daenerys Targaryen on the walls of Winterfell, her hair whipping in the wind, her face set in grim determination as she watched the dead crash against the living. He thought of her in the crypts afterwards, hands trembling as she reached for a cup, the weight of loss in the hollow under her eyes. He thought of her above King's Landing, dragonfire pouring from the sky. Between those images, a chasm yawned that no words could easily bridge. The ship eased into a small harbor carved into the rock, sheltered from the open sea by natural arms of stone. Ropes were thrown, caught, secured. Gangplanks were lowered with hollow thuds. A party waited at the foot of the causeway. Grey Worm stood at their head, helmet under his arm, unsullied armor polished to a dull sheen. Beside him, Tyrion Lannister shifted his weight from one leg to the other, squinting down at the approaching ships with a familiar mix of skepticism and resignation. "Well," Davos said as the ship bumped gently against the dock, "if they meant to kill us outright, they wouldn't bother with a reception." "Comforting," Sam said faintly. Jon drew a breath that smelled of salt and stone and dragon. He patted Ghost's flank. "Stay close," he murmured. The plank thumped into place. Jon descended first, boots finding their footing on the wet wood. Ghost followed, fur bristling, eyes never still. Sam and Davos came behind. Grey Worm watched them approach, expression as unreadable as ever. Tyrion's gaze flicked from Jon to Ghost to the ships behind them, where northern men watched warily. "Lord Snow," Tyrion said when they were close enough. "Or is it Prince Targaryen now? I confess, I'm behind on the latest titles. They seem to sprout like heads on a hydra." "Jon is fine," Jon said. "Titles haven't done me much good." Tyrion's mouth tilted. "They rarely do the people who deserve them," he said. "Still, you have a talent for accumulating them. King in the North, Savior of the living, Dragon Rider, Torchbearer of inconvenient truths. It's an impressive list." Grey Worm's eyes never left Jon's face. "You come with ships," he said. "With armed men. This is not a visit of friends." "We come with 3 small cogs," Davos said. "Not exactly a conquering fleet. And those armed men are mostly there to stop us sinking." Jon met Grey Worm's gaze. "I'm here to speak with Daenerys Targaryen," he said, "about matters that concern more than this island or that throne. I'd hoped the welcome might be warmer, given what we survived together." Grey Worm's jaw worked once. "You spoke against the Queen," he said. "After King's Landing, you questioned her justice. You left her court without her leave. That court was shifting under our feet," Tyrion said lightly. Some might argue Jon's instincts for self-preservation finally woke up. "Enough," Jon said quietly. "If she means to burn me, let her hear why I've come first. I owe her that much. She owes the world that much." Tyrion studied him. "You've found something," he said. "Or someone. See that look, the one that says you've been handed another impossible task and haven't yet decided whether to curse or embrace it." "Both," Jon admitted. "Excellent," Tyrion said. "The best sort of task." Grey Worm jerked his head toward the causeway. "The Queen will hear you," he said, "but speak carefully. The last man who brought her unwelcome news did not leave with all his breath." Jon thought of Varys, ash drifting from his fingertips as dragonfire consumed him. He pictured the man's calm as he had accepted his fate. He had not known, then, the fullness of what had prompted that choice. Now he did, and he was walking back into the dragon's shadow anyway. The throne room of Dragonstone had always reminded Jon of a dragon's gullet. Long, narrow, lined with stone ribs that arched overhead. Firelight from braziers set in the walls cast flickering shadows that made the carved dragons seem to move, scales rippling, mouths opening to breathe non-existent flame. Daenerys Targaryen sat on the throne at the far end, her back straight, hands resting lightly on the arms carved into talons. Her hair was drawn back in intricate braids, silver white against the dark stone. She wore black scaled leather trimmed with silver thread, the 3-headed dragon of her house picked out subtly at her shoulder. She was thinner than Jon remembered, but the intensity that had always burned in her eyes was undimmed. If anything, it had been tempered, honed into something cooler. The wild, raw grief he had seen in her after the battle with the dead had settled into a controlled flame. Tyrion Lannister stood at her right hand, his hands clasped behind his back. His hair had gone a little grayer, his face a little more lined. Grey Worm stood to her left, still as a statue. A handful of other advisors lingered farther back, Missandei, her dark eyes sharp. A few lesser lords who had survived the fall of King's Landing by bending their pride to survival. Jon's boots echoed on the floor as he approached, Sam and Davos slightly behind him. Ghost padded at his side, earning a few uneasy glances but no overt reaction. The direwolf's presence was a reminder that no matter how far from the snow he walked, the north came with him. When they were halfway down the hall, Daenerys raised her hand. The small procession halted. For a long moment, she simply looked at Jon. "Last we stood in a hall together," she said, her voice carrying clearly. "It was in the great ruin of King's Landing. The air stank of ash and blood. You could barely look at me." Jon remembered. He remembered the screams, the bodies, the charred faces of children. He remembered her atop Drogon, a figure of terrible beauty and fury. He remembered the taste of ash on his tongue. "I can look at you now," he said. "The air is clearer." For the moment, she replied. Silence stretched. The carved dragons along the walls seemed to lean closer. You came back, she said. There was something in her tone Jon couldn't quite read. Curiosity, perhaps. A hint of wariness. I did, Jon said. I didn't expect to, but there are things you need to hear. Things that concern your house as much as mine. Houses, I should say. Tyrion's brows lifted. Ah, he said softly. So the rumors are true. You've heard from the Citadel. About Rhaegal. And Lyanna. And you. Daenerys's fingers tightened briefly on the throne's arms. I have heard whispers, she said. Letters intercepted. Ravens turned aside. The world is very interested in who my father's heir might be. Or thinks it might be. Her gaze sharpened. Are you here to claim the Iron Throne, Jon Snow? The question hung in the air like a blade. No, Jon said. If I never see that throne again, it will be too soon. I'm here because of what that truth means for more than crowns and laws. Because my blood is not just yours. It is the North's. And because that blood is stirring other old blood in places you care about, whether you know it or not. Missandei tilted her head. Old blood? She echoed. Sam stepped forward, clutching a leather tube of scrolls. Your Grace, he said, bowing quickly. My name is Samwell Tarly. We met briefly at Winterfell. I served the Night's Watch at the Wall and the Citadel in Old Town. I've been studying records of the doom of Valyria, of the dragonlords who survived it, and of Prince Rhaegal's attempts to understand the connection between that catastrophe and the long night we all barely survived. Daenerys's eyes flicked to him, then back to Jon. And he was trying to gather them, Sam said. The scattered remnants of the old Valyrian houses. Those whose ancestors once rode dragons before the doom. He believed that when Valyria fell, it weakened protections against certain forces in the world. Forces of ice as much as fire. He thought the only way to repair that damage was to unite those who still carried the old blood. But he also knew that Valyria fell because it forgot to fear the cold. So he sought a partner from the north. From a house bound to older magics. House Stark, Tyrion murmured. Lyanna Stark, Sam confirmed. Your brother knew what he was doing, Your Grace. He wasn't just following his heart. He was building something, a bridge between worlds. Daenerys's expression did not soften, but something in her shoulders eased. And the child of that union, she said slowly, is standing in my hall asking me not for a crown, but for what? My ships. Jon met her gaze. Your ships, yes, he said. And your name, your support. There are dragon-blooded families in the free cities who already feel the stir of this truth. They've known for generations that the Targaryens were not the only survivors of the doom. Some hid, some schemed, some made fortunes and pretended to forget their heritage. If we don't speak to them first, someone else will. Someone who doesn't care whether the world freezes or burns, so long as they stand above it for a while. And you do care, Daenerys said. It wasn't quite a question. I've seen what happens when fire runs unchecked, Jon said. And when the dead march. I don't want either to come again. You said once you wanted to break the wheel. This is a chance to turn it into something else instead. If dragonlords are going to exist in this world, they need to be bound to something more than their own pride. Tyrion's eyes narrowed. You want to create an order, he said, of dragonlords who swear oaths beyond their own houses. To what? To whom? To the living, Jon said simply. To each other. To a purpose beyond conquest. That sounds suspiciously like a night's watch with dragons, Tyrion said. Better than dragons with no vows at all, Davos muttered. Daenerys rose. The movement drew every eye. The dragons carved behind her seemed to rear up as her shadow crossed them. You speak of oaths and purpose, she said, descending the steps from the throne. You speak of using my family's name and my dragon's memory to bind others. And yet you will not take the throne that laws and prophecies both might give you. Why? Jon held her gaze. Because I don't trust myself with that much power, he said. And because I know too well what it costs the world when one person decides they know what's best for everyone. A flicker, their pain, anger, something like guilt, passed quickly. You killed a queen once, Daenerys said quietly. Would you kill another if you thought I stood in the way of this order you imagine? The hall seemed to draw breath. Grey Worm's hand tightened on his spear. Ghost's hackles rose. Jon's jaw clenched. He could taste iron and ashes on his tongue, though the air here was only stone and faint smoke. I don't want to kill anyone, he said, but I won't follow anyone, dragonlord or otherwise, who thinks the world is theirs to remake with fire alone. Not anymore. They stared at each other, two people bound by blood now as well as history, standing beneath the carved ribs of a vanished empire. At last, Daenerys looked away. You ask much, she said. You ask me to lend my ships, my name, and my tacit blessing to a man the world might learn to call king in my stead. You ask me to trust that you won't let these dragonlords turn from guardians to tyrants. You ask me to share what little remains of my family's legacy. I'm asking you, Jon said, to help ensure there is a world left for any legacy at all. Silence fell again. Then Tyrion cleared his throat. It seems to me, he said carefully, that the question isn't whether we can afford to let Jon do this. It's whether we can afford not to. Those dragon-blooded exiles won't stay quiet forever. If we don't bring them into some sort of structure, they'll build their own. And I've known too many men with a whiff of destiny about them to trust that. Daenerys's gaze sharpened. You propose we let him go, then, with ships and our blessing, to court other dragonlords in our name. I propose we let him go in our presence, or near enough, Tyrion said. With one of your dragons overhead, perhaps. With men loyal to you as well as to him. Make it clear this is not a splintering of power, but an extension of it. Her eyes flicked back to Jon. You'd accept that? A dragon at your back that doesn't answer only to you? Jon thought of Rhaegal's eyes on him in the sky above the sea, of Drogon's roar, of the heat of dragonfire and the cold of dead hands. I'd prefer a dragon that answered to no one's ego, he said. But those don't exist. Yes, if this is to work, it has to be built on trust as much as fear. Let them see that we stand together. That wolf and dragon are not enemies. The corner of Daenerys's mouth twitched. Wolf and dragon, she murmured. There are bards who would sell their grandmothers for the chance to turn that into a song. Let them sing later, Jon said. We have work to do first. Later, when the formalities had been exhausted and the courtiers dismissed, Daenerys Targaryen led Jon Snow to the war room. The carved stone table dominated the chamber, its surface an intricately detailed relief of Westeros. Little carved markers stood on key locations: the dire wolf at Winterfell, the lion at Casterly Rock, the rose at Highgarden. Many had been pushed aside, replaced by more practical tokens: pebbles for ruined castles, bits of iron for burned cities. Candles burned in sconces around the room, their light pooling over the ridges and valleys of the map. Shadows of the dragons carved into the walls seemed to crawl when the flames flickered. Daenerys rested her hands on the edge of the table, fingers splayed over the narrow sea. Jon stood opposite, his own hands braced on the carved stormlands. It feels smaller every time I look at it, she said. This land I bled so much to claim, this throne I flew across the world to sit. Men died by the thousands for these lines in stone. Jon's gaze drifted to the south, to the tiny, stylized rendering of King's Landing. Someone had scorched the stone there, a blackened ring marking where the city lay. It's still a lot of land to govern, he said. Govern, she repeated. A dull little word for such a bloody past. She looked up at him. You truly have no desire to sit in that chair, she said. Even knowing what you know now. Even knowing that the realm might accept you more readily than it ever accepted me. I don't know that, Jon said, and I don't want to find out. I'm a soldier, Daenerys. Poor politician. I can hold a wall, lead a charge, speak to men who've seen war. Put me in a throne room and I start wishing for a sword. She huffed, a breath that might almost have been a laugh. You and I both. Yet you sit there, Jon said. Because if I don't, someone worse will, she replied. That was the thought that drove me. Every step, every fire. If not me, then some Lannister or Frey or another mad Targaryen waiting in the wings. The wheel would keep turning, crushing the same people. At least I had the decency to admit I was trying to break it. He watched her for a moment. The candlelight traced the hollows under her cheekbones, the line of an old burned scar on her wrist. She looked older, not in years but in weight. Do you regret it? He asked quietly. Her gaze dropped to the blackened mark on the map where King's Landing lay. Her throat worked once. I regret that I didn't find another way, she said. I regret that I believed so completely that fear was the only language left to me, that love had proved itself too fickle, too easily turned. She raised her eyes again. I don't regret that Cersei Lannister is dead, or that the people who cheered as my father burned were forced to reckon with the consequences of their own choices. But I regret the children, the innocents, the ones who were simply under my shadow when I decided to cast it. Jon's fingers tightened on the table's edge. Regret doesn't bring them back, he said. No, she agreed, but it might keep me from making the same choice again. That's why you're here, isn't it? To give me something else to do with my dragons and my blood besides burn my way through history. Yes, he said, and because this isn't just about you or me. It's about what comes after us. If there are dragonlords in Essos who still see themselves as rightful heirs to Valyria, they won't stay quiet forever. Better to draw them into the light now than fight them in a few years when they've gathered strength in the shadows. Daenerys' hand drifted east, over the carved sea toward the edge of the table, where a rough outline of Essos had been begun but never fully completed. My brother never spoke of them, she said. He talked of taking back Westeros, of killing the usurper's dogs. He never mentioned cousins hiding in the free cities, clinging to scraps of our past. He may not have known, Jon said. Rhaegal did. He was looking beyond immediate revenge, beyond one throne. Rhaegal, her mouth shaped the name thoughtfully. I barely remember him. A shadow, a story, a man my father alternately praised and cursed. Sometimes I think he was more myth than person. Jon thought of the glimpses Bran had shown him through halting words. The prince in armor at the Trident, the man with the harp at Harrenhal, the quiet, intense figure in a sept in Dorne, taking Lyanna Stark's hand. My father used to say similar things about your father, he said. Stories, shadows. One mistake turned into a song. Daenerys' lips twisted. Madness runs in my family, she said, or so the world would have it. Flip a coin every time a Targaryen is born, they say. I've tried my whole life to make that coin land on the side that doesn't burn everything it touches. You're not your father, Jon said, just as I'm not Rhaegal, or Ned, or Lyanna. Our blood sets the stage, but we choose whether to draw the sword. She studied him, and you choose to draw it now not for a crown, but for some weird little order of dragonlords and wargs and whoever else you collect along the way. He almost smiled. When you put it that way, it sounds foolish. It sounds hopeful, she said, which can be worse. He nodded toward Essos. Hope is what kept those people alive, he said. Those dragon-blooded families. Hope that one day someone would call them back to a purpose. If we're lucky, that purpose can be something other than conquest. If we're unlucky, she said, we'll be giving them exactly what they've dreamed of: legitimacy, acknowledgement, a banner to gather under, and then we'll have to put them down when they outgrow their chains. Then we make those chains out of something stronger than fear, Jon said. We bind them to oaths, to each other, to the memory of what happens when dragonfire is turned on the innocent. We show them the North. The North, she repeated. You speak of it as if it were a person or a god. In some ways it is, Jon said. It endured before dragons. It endured after. It knows how to survive. If we can tie these dragonlords to that kind of endurance, maybe their power will serve more than their pride. She fell silent, tracing a finger along the coastline from Dragonstone up toward White Harbor and Winterfell. "You really have thought about this," she said, "not just as a man running from a crown." "I've had nothing but time and long northern nights to think," he said. "And Samwell Tarly," she added. "He looks like a man who drags books behind him the way other men drag swords." Jon's mouth twitched. "He does." Daenerys straightened. "Very well," she said. "You'll have ships. Then, I'll send Rhaegal with you. Drogon stays with me. One dragon is sufficient to make a point in any Essos harbor, and I'd rather not leave my people here completely undefended." Jon blinked. "Rhaegal," he repeated. "You've ridden him before," she said. "He knows your scent, your blood. The dragonlords you seek will take one look at you on his back and know you are not merely some up-jumped northerner with a fancy name." "I am an up-jumped northerner with a fancy name," Jon said. She smiled then, properly, for the first time since he'd arrived. It transformed her face, softening the lines grief and battle had carved. "Yes," she said, "but you're my up-jumped northerner now. For as long as this works." "And when it stops working?" he asked. Her smile faded. "Then we'll decide whose coin landed on madness and whose on mercy," she said. "And we'll act accordingly." The waves outside crashed against Dragonstone's cliffs, a dull, steady thunder. Jon looked down at the map, the carved land they both had fought for, bled for, burned for. It felt suddenly like a piece in a larger game, one whose board stretched farther than either of them had seen. "Essos awaits," Daenerys said. "Let's hope it's willing to listen." The courtyard where the dragons rested opened directly toward the sea, its far side little more than a low wall and a vertiginous drop to the rocks below. The air here was warmer, smelling faintly of sulfur and scorched stone. The snow that had fallen elsewhere in the world melted quickly on Dragonstone's black rock. Here, the only white belonged to seabirds wheeling in the sky and the occasional froth of waves. Drogon lay coiled along one side of the yard, his massive bulk pressed against the wall. Smoke curled lazily from the gaps between his scales. His eyes tracked every movement, pupils slitted against the daylight. Rhaegal occupied the opposite side, slightly smaller but no less imposing, his wings half unfurled as if he were contemplating a sudden flight. Daenerys Targaryen stood by Drogon's great head, one hand resting on his snout. Her fingers looked fragile against the rough, warm scales. Drogon huffed, a rumble that shook dust from the stones, but did not move away. Jon Snow stood nearer to Rhaegal, ghost at his heel. The direwolf's lips were peeled back, but his stance was steady. He remembered this place, this scent. He remembered the last time Jon had stood between these dragons and the sky. The last time he had mounted Rhaegal's back, the world had been hurtling toward ice. Now it tilted toward something more uncertain. Rhaegal lowered his head slightly, golden eyes fixed on Jon. They held an unsettling intelligence, an awareness that went beyond animal cunning. The dragon's nostrils flared as he drew in Jon's scent. "He remembers you," Daenerys said. Her voice carried easily across the yard. "Dragons have long memories. Longer than men," Jon said. He took a cautious step forward. Ghost remained at his side. Drogon's gaze flicked toward the direwolf, a spark of curiosity in the molten depths. He rumbled again, a warning or a greeting. It was hard to tell. "Easy," Jon murmured to both of them. He remembered the first time he had reached out to touch Rhaegal's neck, the feel of heat and power under the scales, the moment when the dragon had decided not to kill him. He remembered the terror and exultation of flight. Now, as he raised his hand again, Rhaegal did not recoil. His head dipped further, lowering until his snout was within reach. Jon laid his palm against the warm, textured skin. A shiver, not of fear, but of recognition, went through him. It felt as if some part of his blood answered a call older than his own life. Images flickered behind his eyes, not his own memories. A sky the color of molten gold over a city of pale stone. A rider laughing, hair whipping, as they dove together. The taste of hot ash on the wind. He pulled in a sharp breath. "You feel it," Daenerys said quietly. "The way they carry echoes of those who rode before, of places they've never flown and yet remember." Jon nodded. "Bran said dragons remember things their riders forget," he said. "Bran sees rivers of time," she replied. "Dragons drink from them. We're the ones trying not to drown." Rhaegal huffed, hot breath washing over Jon's face. His pupils expanded slightly, rounder, less predatory. He nudged Jon's chest with the blunt end of his snout, almost knocking him backward. Ghost growled, hackles rising, but Jon steadied himself and kept his hand in place. "All right," he said. "All right, then," Daenerys murmured to Drogon in High Valyrian, a string of harsh, beautiful syllables. Drogon's eyes closed briefly, then opened again, calmer. He shifted his bulk, making room. "Rhaegal will fly with you," she called. "Drogon and I will remain here. If there is trouble, send Raven or signal fire. Dragons can cross that sea faster than any ship." "What do you call trouble?" Jon asked. Her smile was brief and edged. "You've seen what I call trouble," she said. "Anything less than that." He moved along Rhaegal's neck, fingers trailing over scales raised in ridges. The dragon shifted, adjusting his posture, making it easier for Jon to mount. It was strange how natural it felt now. Swinging a leg over the massive shoulder, finding purchase between spines, settling into a place that seemed almost shaped for him. "How is it?" Sam whispered from near the courtyard entrance, eyes huge. "Terrifying," Jon said truthfully, "and familiar." He glanced down at Ghost. "You can't fly," he said, "but you can still cross water. Stay close to Sam and Davos." Ghost's red gaze met his. For a heartbeat, Jon thought the wolf might protest. Then he huffed and stepped back, as if acknowledging that not all roads could be run on four legs. Rhaegal shifted again, crouching, muscles bunching beneath Jon. The sensation was like sitting atop controlled thunder. Jon gripped the ridges in front of him, legs pressing against hot scales. Daenerys stroked Drogon's neck, then lifted her gaze to Jon. "When you fly into those Essos skies," she said, "remember that you do so as more than a messenger. You're a reminder that dragons are not dead, that Valyria's legacy isn't just ash." "I'd rather be a reminder that we survived winter," Jon said. "You can be both," she replied. "Ride well, Jon Snow." Rhaegal's wings snapped open, casting half the courtyard into sudden shadow. The downstroke sent a blast of wind skimming across the stones, whipping cloaks and scattering loose straw. Several servants ducked. One fell to his knees, whispering a prayer. The dragon leaped. For a moment, Jon's stomach dropped, his heart clenching. Then the ground fell away, and Dragonstone shrank beneath them. The sea rushed out in all directions, a vast expanse of gray-blue. Wind tore at his hair and cloak. Rhaegal's body moved beneath him with astonishing grace and power. He looked down and saw Drogon watching, a black mountain with burning eyes. Beside the larger dragon, Daenerys stood like a pale flame against the dark stone, hair streaming. She raised one hand, a small, defiant figure on a cliff that had seen empires rise and fall. Jon raised his own in answer. Then Rhaegal banked, turning his snout toward the east, toward a horizon Jon had never crossed. The world spread out before him, larger than any map, freer than any throne. They did not leave for Essos immediately. Even dragons needed time to rest, and ships needed provisions. 2 days passed on Dragonstone in a blur of preparation. Daenerys placed at Jon's disposal not only his 3 northern cogs, but also 2 sleeker vessels from her own modest fleet. Essos built ships with deeper keels and more graceful lines. Their sails dyed a dark red that caught the evening light like spilled wine. Their crews were a mix of freedmen from Meereen, hardened sailors from the Narrow Sea, and a scattering of Dothraki who had decided that the ocean was an enemy worth learning to ride. On the second evening, as the sun bled into the water and turned the sky purple and gold, Jon walked the docks with Tyrion Lannister. Rhaegal perched on a high outcropping above, a massive shadow outlined against the dying light, wings folded tight. "Quite a sight," Tyrion said, nodding toward the dragon. Still takes my breath away, or perhaps that's just the lingering scent of sulfur and fear. You've had dragons longer than I have, Jon said. That doesn't mean I'll ever stop being aware that I'm essentially living beneath several very large, very unpredictable weapons, Tyrion replied. It's not the most relaxing way to age, but it does keep the heart lively. They paused near a coil of rope where a pair of sailors were arguing in a language Jon didn't recognize. Ghost padded ahead, nose twitching as he sniffed at crates and barrels, leaving damp paw prints on the wood. So, Tyrion said, you're off to play shepherd to dragonlords. I never thought I'd see the day. I thought I was just off to keep them from burning the world, Jon said. Same difference in my experience, Tyrion said. People with power rarely like being told to behave, especially not by someone who reminds them that there are consequences. Jon rested his hands on the railing, looking out over the harbor. Do you think this is madness? He asked. Tyrion tilted his head, considering. Madness is a matter of scale, he said. Convincing a barbarian horde and a slave army to cross an ocean and conquer a continent? That was madness. Trying to convince a handful of exiled nobles to swear oaths to something larger than their own pride. He shrugged. That's just diplomacy with more teeth. Jon glanced at him. You didn't answer.
To your own side.
All right. Yes, it's mad. You're leaving a relatively stable position in the north to sail into a nest of ambitions and old grudges armed with nothing but a dragon, a stack of scrolls, and an inconvenient sense of morality. On the other hand, if anyone's qualified for such a doomed errand, it's you. That's not comforting, Jon said. It wasn't meant to be, Tyrion said. Comfort is a luxury we exhausted some time ago. A gull swooped low over the water, crying harshly. The sailors' argument escalated briefly, then subsided when their captain barked something sharp. Daenerys trusts you, Tyrion said after a moment. More than she trusts most. That's significant. She trusted me once, Jon said. I broke that trust. You challenged her, Tyrion corrected. There's a difference. A man who never hears no eventually forgets what it means. You reminded her it exists. In an unfortunate way, yes, with unfortunate results. But you also kept her from becoming something worse than what she already was. Jon thought of King's Landing again, of ash and bodies, of the moment when he had wrapped his arms around her and plunged the dagger home. The memory was a wound that had never fully scarred. She doesn't forgive easily, Jon said. Nor should she, Tyrion said. Nor should you. Forgiveness is not the same as forgetting. You're not here to absolve each other, Jon. You're here because the world is still precarious, and the two of you happen to be standing where the cracks are widest. Jon let out a breath. You always did have a way with cheerful metaphors. I aim to please, Tyrion said, or at least to distract. Failing that, I drink. You're not drinking now, Jon observed. Not tonight, Tyrion said. Tonight I prefer to watch the horizon sober. I want to remember the exact moment when I let you sail off to either save us all or make things infinitely worse. Jon's mouth twitched despite himself. You could come with us, he said. You've seen enough of Essos to know which noble houses to avoid. I've seen enough of Essos to know I'm not welcome in many of its finer establishments, Tyrion replied. Besides, someone has to stay here and whisper sense into Daenerys' ear while you're gone, or at least try. 2 stark reminders in her life might be one too many. Pun intended? Jon asked. Oh, very much so, Tyrion said. They fell silent, watching the last sliver of sun sink into the water. Rhaegal shifted on his perch, wings rustling, as if impatient with stillness. Do you ever wonder, Tyrion said quietly, if there's a version of this world where none of this happened? Where you stayed Lord Commander at the Wall, I drank myself to death in some brothel, and Daenerys lived out her life as a minor Khaleesi in a far-off land. Yes, Jon said, and in that world, the dead might have devoured us all, or another mad king might have risen, or something worse. Worse than all this, Tyrion mused. That's a depressing thought. It's what keeps me moving, Jon said. If we stop, the worst thing will have its chance. Tyrion nodded slowly. Then go, he said. Shepherd your dragonlords. Talk them into being better than their blood. If you succeed, I'll toast you with the finest wine left in whatever cellars we haven't burned. If you fail, he shrugged. I suppose I'll be too dead to worry about it. Comforting again, Jon said. The truth rarely is, Tyrion said. They parted at the foot of the gangplank. Jon paused, looking back toward the castle where Daenerys' figure was just visible on a balcony, a pale shape against the dark stone. She did not wave, but he felt her gaze like heat on the back of his neck. He touched Ghost's head once, then stepped aboard. The ropes creaked. The sea waited. Dawn crept into Dragonstone's harbor under a veil of mist. The sky was a pale, washed-out blue, streaked with thin clouds. The sea lay still as hammered metal, disturbed only by the gentle rocking of the ships and the occasional leap of a fish. Men moved quietly along the decks, coiling ropes, checking knots, making last-minute adjustments to cargo. The clink of metal on metal, the soft thud of boots on wet planks, the low murmur of voices formed a subdued chorus. On the leading ship, a northern cog now flanked by sleeker Essos hulls, Jon Snow stood near the bow, cloak wrapped tight, Ghost sitting solid and white at his side. The direwolf's breath puffed in the chill air, his fur beaded with early dew. Banners stirred as a breeze picked up. The gray direwolf of House Stark, the red three-headed dragon of House Targaryen. They snapped against the masts, a visible sign of an alliance that had nearly burned itself out and now flickered into something new. On a high balcony overlooking the harbor, Daenerys Targaryen and Tyrion Lannister watched. She stood with her hands resting on the stone balustrade, hair braided and pinned, a cloak clasped at her throat against the morning chill. Tyrion leaned on the parapet beside her, eyes narrowed against the low light. From a cliff further along the coast, Rhaegal launched himself into the air. The dragon's wings unfurled, catching the wind with a crack like sails snapping. He beat them once, twice, rising in a graceful arc that sent ripples racing across the water below. His shadow fell over the harbor, swallowing ships and men alike in sudden shade. The sailors paused to look up, faces a mix of fear and awe. Some muttered prayers, others simply stared, mouths open. Rhaegal circled once, twice, then settled into a steady flight above the leading ship, his presence as much a signal as any flag. "Cast OFF," a captain bellowed. Ropes were thrown free, wound back onto decks. The ships eased away from the dock, creaking as they took the strain of the tide. Oars dipped into the water, pushing them clear. Sails began to unfurl, catching the breeze as it strengthened. Jon kept his eyes on the horizon, where the mist thinned to a faint line. Beyond that, invisible but vast, lay Essos with its cities and palaces and forgotten bloodlines. Samwell Tarly stood near the mast, clutching a satchel of scrolls like a lifeline. His face was pale but determined. Davos Seaworth moved among the crew, offering a word here, a correction there, his presence steadying. Ghost shifted, pressing his shoulder against Jon's leg. Jon rested his hand on the direwolf's head. "Here we go again," he murmured. On the balcony, Daenerys watched him. The wind tugged at her hair, at the edge of her cloak. She looked, for a moment, less like a queen and more like a woman seeing off a piece of herself. "He's going to change things," Tyrion said quietly. "One way or another. Everything he touches changes," she replied. "Walls, thrones, people, including you," Tyrion said. She didn't answer. Her gaze followed the ships as they cleared the mouth of the harbor, their bows turning east. Rhaegal roared once, a sound that rolled across the water and rebounded from the cliffs. "Do you trust him?" Tyrion asked. Daenerys' eyes did not leave the receding ships. "I trust that he will do what he believes is right," she said. "Even if it breaks him, even if it breaks me. That's Not quite the same as trust, Tyrion said. It's the only kind that matters, she said. The fleet moved into open water, the island of Dragonstone shrinking behind them. The castle with its dragons and shadows became a dark smudge against the sky, then a line, then nothing. Ahead, the sea stretched, vast and indifferent. Rhaegal flew above a living banner. The wind filled the sails, carrying them toward a land where old bloodlines slept and dreamed of fire. Jon watched the waves. Each swell that rose and fell beneath the hull was another step away from the world he knew, another step toward a future he couldn't yet see. He thought of Winterfell's stone, of the feel of the wall beneath his boots, of the Godswood's red leaves whispering in the wind. He thought of Lyanna Stark's statue in the Crypts and the way the torchlight had painted shadows on her face. "We're coming," he thought, though there was no one to hear it but the sea and the dragon above. "If you're out there, hiding under other names and other banners, we're coming." The ships slipped further into the east, leaving behind the land of familiar ghosts and sailing toward a horizon where new ones waited. From above, the fleet looked small. Rhaegal's eyes took it all in, the curve of the hulls slicing through the water, the spread of the sails catching the wind, the tiny figures moving on deck. The dragon's wings stretched wide, riding thermals invisible to human senses. The sun glanced off his scales, picking out patterns like old runes. Below, Jon Snow shaded his eyes with one hand, watching the dragon's silhouette weave across the sky. Each time Rhaegal passed overhead, the ship's shadow darkened briefly, as if a cloud had crossed the sun. "Magnificent," Samwell Tarly said, squinting upward. "I know I keep saying that, but, well, look at him." "I am," Jon said. "He makes the ship feel insignificant," Sam went on, "but in a good way, like we're part of something larger. Not just tiny men on a vast ocean hoping not to be swallowed." Davos Seaworth, overhearing as he passed, snorted. "From where I'm standing, we're still tiny men on a vast ocean," he said. "But I'll admit, having a dragon in the sky makes me feel marginally less likely to be boarded by pirates." "Pirates?" Sam squeaked. "Relax," Davos said. "Most pirates don't fancy tangling with fire-breathing lizards. Bad for business." The wind was steady, neither too harsh nor too slack. The sails bellied outward, timbers groaned in a reassuring way. The men found their rhythm, some hauling lines, some mending nets, some simply standing and staring eastward as if hoping to see Essos rise from the water in one leap. As the hours passed, the faintest smudge appeared on the horizon, a darker line against the lighter blue. Could have been a trick of light, could have been a cloud, but Jon felt, instinctively, that it was land. Essos, the continent that had shaped Daenerys' rise, that held the ruins of Valyria, that hid the descendants of dragonlords behind silk curtains and marble walls. "Do you think they'll come easily?" Sam asked. "These people, when they see you on a dragon, when they hear your name?" "No," Jon said. "Nothing worthwhile comes easily. But you do think some will come," Sam pressed. "Some will listen." Jon thought of the scrolls in Sam's satchel, of Rhaegar's notes, of Bran's visions, of men and women in far-off cities waking from dreams of wolves and fire. "I think some are already listening," he said. "They just don't know to what yet." He turned his face into the wind, letting it whip his hair back. The salt stung his eyes. The taste of it sat on his tongue. "Once, I thought my life would be spent at the wall," he said softly. "That I'd die there, forgotten, holding a sword against the cold. That was enough. It was simple." "And now?" Sam asked. "Now nothing is simple," Jon said. "But the work is the same. Stand where others won't. Carry what others can't. Try to make sure the world that comes after is better than the one you found." Sam smiled faintly. "You make it sound almost noble." "It's not noble," Jon said. "It's necessary." Rhaegal banked, circling lower for a moment. The dragon's shadow slid across the deck, over Jon and Sam and Davos and Ghost. Men looked up, shading their eyes. Some smiled. Some crossed themselves. Some simply stood, letting the shadow wash over them like a blessing or a warning. Far ahead, the smudge on the horizon thickened. Behind them, Dragonstone had vanished entirely. Westeros was a memory, its wars and thrones reduced to stories carried on the wind. Ahead, Essos waited with its own histories, its own wounds, its own secrets. Jon tightened his grip on the rail. "Let's see what kind of dragonlords the world has left," he said. The fleet sailed on, small but resolute, a line of fragile wood and woven cloth and stubborn hearts beneath the watchful eye of a creature from a world half-remembered and half-dreamed. The sea carried them forward, indifferent to their hopes and fears both. Above, Rhaegal roared, the sound scattering gulls and sending a shiver across the water's surface. It rolled out toward the distant shore, a prelude to words yet to be spoken, oaths yet to be sworn. Somewhere in a city Jon had never seen, a man with silver in his hair woke with a start, heart pounding, the echo of that roar in his ears. Somewhere else, a woman traced the outline of a dragon on an amulet and whispered a name she didn't know she remembered. The wolf dragon was coming, and the world, in ways large and small, began to shift.